Chapter 6:16. Although I didn't have much contact with sword cultivators, from the aura that Zhao Han exuded, I knew that his technique wasn't simple. Hence, I used the Heavenly Spirit 9 steps at once. The seal formed by a seal Heavenly Master had the effect of increasing one's cultivation. This was why I had summoned the seal from the start. Adding on the boost from the Heavenly Dipper 9 steps, even though my cultivation was slightly lower than Zhao Han's, being only at the mid-stage of Seal Heavenly Master, with the forward seal and the Heavenly Dipper 9 steps, my battle prowess was almost equal to Zhao Han's, or even slightly stronger. Hence, no matter how strange his technique was, it was impossible for him to defeat me with just one move. The one-word mantra was the most commonly used technique by a Heaven Master. It was also known as the Law of Words. Just as I said that, a formless power surged towards Zhao Han. The suppress word mantra was derived from a magic tool like a paperweight. It had the intent of suppressing. Thus, as soon as Zhao Han came into contact with the invisible force, his body became sluggish. Even the black true essence that was floating outside could not help but shrink inward, and like armor, it stuck tightly to his body. The lightning that was initially faintly discernible became extremely violent. It seemed to be expressing its dissatisfaction at being suppressed and was resisting. Zhao Han and Zhao Hao were cousins. They could be considered as direct descendants of the Xuanda Grotto Heaven. Naturally, they weren't easy to get along with. Although the one-word mantra was mystical, it was just a normal technique of a Heaven Master. In front of the Grotto Heaven that had been passed down for hundreds of years, it wasn't worth mentioning. I didn't know what technique he used, but in less than 3 seconds, he broke free from the mantra's restraint. The black cloud that was formed by true essence spread outwards once again. In no time it reached my feet. As the lightning flashed, there was an explosive and dangerous aura. Right at that moment, Zhao Han's figure finally appeared from the black cloud. After breaking free from the restriction of the incantation, his movements didn't show the slightest pause. His right foot touched the ground, and with the support of his true essence, he leapt into the air. He raised the great sword in his hand and heavily chopped towards me. The ridicule on his face became more and more apparent. He grinned at me and said, "You're only SOSO." Zhao Han's movements looked slow, as though the huge sword in his hand had slowed him down. He could even fall to the ground at any moment. However, the sword's momentum was really fast. He had just swung his sword in the air, but I felt an ancient and heavy aura coming at me. It was like a strong gust of wind that forced me to retreat. I smiled faintly and gestured with my hands. "Is that so?" In the next second, a small and exquisite seal appeared in the sky above Zhao Han. With a crushing aura, it pressed down heavily on him. It was as if Zhao Han's body had been electrocuted, and he suddenly lost all his strength. He couldn't even lift that huge sword anymore. Accompanied by an explosive sound, he sank into the arena, sending up a cloud of dust. After the dust settled, Zhao Han's sorry figure was revealed on the arena, as well as a series of spiderweb-like cracks. Due to the Qilance matter yesterday, there were a lot of gazes that were focused on me. Today's match with Zhao Han naturally attracted a lot of attention. Even though the intense battle was over in a blink of an eye, everyone present was a person with great cultivation. Even if some of them couldn't see the details clearly, they could still guess what had happened. At that moment I heard many voices. Some praised me for using the incantation to perfection, some praised the sword techniques of the Xuanda Wonderland's Zhao family, but there were also a portion of people that were astonished. How could there be Xuanda Wonderland's sword cultivators in the match between Wanwu Wonderland and 3 Emperor Well Wonderland? I had to admit that Zhao Han was indeed very strong. Putting aside his horrifying Daoist sword, just based on his true essence cultivation and his background as a sword cultivator, even a celestial master with a late-stage seal cultivation might not be his match. The reason why I was able to defeat him was because compared to Zhao Han and his cousin Zhao Hao, I was lacking a brain. He thought that the method I had prepared for him was only the suppress incantation, which was why he was so arrogant after breaking the restriction of the incantation. But in reality, what I had prepared for him was far more than that. That suppress incantation was only a prelude to slow down his speed and stall for time for me. My true power, which had been strengthened by the Celestial Master Seal and the Heavenly Spirit 9 steps, was completely condensed into the seal in the 3 seconds that he was restricted by the incantation. Zhao Han thought that after the incantation was broken, my subordinate would be defenseless and would definitely die under his shocking sword. But what he didn't expect was that, after he broke through the restriction of the incantation, he would be beaten down by my Celestial Master Seal. The path of sword cultivators had always been focused on the existence of sharpness, and what they pursued was the supreme realm of one sword to break all techniques. On this point, no matter if it was little Amo's already dead master, or his parents that were refined into sword servants, or even Zhao Hao who was the head of Schwanda Wonderland, they were no exception. But this Zhao Han was different. Although his sword had that kind of unstoppable momentum, it had more of an ancient and heavy aura, which was extremely strange. I couldn't figure out what Zhao Hao would do next, but it was better to maintain a distance. Thinking about that, I retreated a few steps and kept the Celestial Master Seal back into my body, and took out the armor-removing sword that I had exchanged with Song Feng from Xiang Lu's body. Although the Celestial Master Seal was mystical, but it was also the foundation of cultivation. Even though I had used the power of the Celestial Master Seal to injure Zhao Han, but it also made me understand how outstanding Zhao Han was. So, in order to prevent too much damage from the next battle and affect the next battle, it was better for me to keep the Celestial Master Seal. Zhao Han took this opportunity to stand up. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at the armor-removing sword in my hand. That's right. Zhao Hao said that you also use a sword, so it's best for me to force you to take out your sword and have a good fight with you. Sword? I looked at the armor-removing sword in my hand. What did Zhao Hao mean by forcing me to take out my sword? I shook my head and decided to deal with Zhao Han first. I shook the armor-removing sword and said to him, I indeed use a sword, but I don't know if my sword or your sword is stronger. When Zhao Han saw my armor-removing sword, he wasn't surprised. It was obvious that he already knew that the armor-removing sword was in my hand. He raised the huge sword beside him and said with some arrogance, This sword is called Great Raven. It is the first famous sword in the hands of the ancient master Ogz. Even though it isn't as natural as your armor-removing sword, it is still one of the famous swords in the world, and is a rare treasure. Moreover, it has been nourished by my chi and true essence for many years and is already connected to my mind. It isn't something a kid like you can compare to. Saying that, Zhao Han suddenly stopped. He flipped his right hand that was holding the sword and turned the Great Raven sword back to its normal appearance. Then he said again, Next, I'm going to use my full strength. Zhou-Yi, be careful. Don't become a dead soul under my Great Raven sword. Saying that, without waiting for me to react, Zhao Han held the sword with one hand and formed a hand seal with the other. It was indeed correct to say that I became a monk halfway through. I only came into contact with the sword cultivation after coming to Wanwu Paradise. It was only a few days in total. The reason why I took out the armor-removing sword was that it didn't require me to use any sword technique. I only needed to pour in enough true essence to be able to erupt with extraordinary power. Even though I wasn't injured in the fight with Zhao Han, I had consumed a lot of true essence. That was why I said those words to him. My goal was to stall for time so that I could absorb more true dragon chi from the jade bracelet and recover more true essence. While I absorbed the true dragon chi and converted it into chi and true essence to be channeled into the armor-removing sword, I observed Zhao Han's movements to deal with his next attack. Zhao Han's movements were very fast. Following the continuous changes in the sword technique, Great Raven quickly floated in front of him. The black clouds that had disappeared after being struck reappeared. However, it was different from the previous time. At that moment, they were flickering with electricity and converging towards the Great Raven's sword, dyeing the originally black sword like ink. From time to time, 1 or 2 dazzling silver lights would jump out, giving off a dangerous aura. Even I couldn't help but become nervous. Finally, Zhao Han's sword technique was ready. He formed a hand seal with both hands and landed heavily on the bottom of the sword hilt. Then, he growled, as though he was reminding me. Following that growl, Great Raven shot out. The silver lightning that was originally flickering from time to time grew with the wind, bringing with it the rumbling sound of thunder. It was like a silver ribbon that spiraled around the black sword. However, it was never able to jump more than 3 feet away from the sword blade. The sword blade was extremely dark, while the lightning was extremely bright white. These two incompatible colors were condensed together by the Great Raven sword. It seemed to be harmonious yet somewhat bewitching. It seemed to have unparalleled power. Seeing this, I didn't hold back anymore. I once again used the heavenly 9 steps to increase my battle prowess. I raised the armor-removing sword and slashed 3 times, releasing 3 sharp sword auras towards the Great Raven sword. I had experimented before. When I was at my peak condition, I could release 4 sword auras using the armor-removing sword. Even though I had consumed a lot of energy in the previous battle, with the recovery of the jade bracelet, I was still far from my peak condition. However, releasing 3 sword auras in a row was still something that I could barely do. Zhao Han's Great Raven sword was ferocious. The sword aura produced by the armor-removing sword wasn't weak either. With the support of the heavenly 9 steps, it instantly appeared in front of the sword tip. In the next second, the first sword aura collided with the Great Raven sword. There wasn't an earth-shattering sound that I had imagined. There wasn't even a single spark. The instant the sword aura of the armor-removing sword clashed with the Great Raven sword, the silver ribbon that was formed from lightning automatically welcomed it. It was like a huge python that opened its mouth and swallowed the sword aura. During the entire process, there wasn't even a ripple, let alone slowing down its speed. Immediately after, the second sword aura met it. Even though there was still a distance between them, from the performance of the silver python, it definitely wouldn't have much of an effect. I grabbed the jade bracelet and started to frantically absorb the dragon aura from the true dragon's vein. I frantically converted it to prepare for my next move. Very quickly, the second sword aura was devoured by the python. Apart from slowing down the Great Raven sword, it didn't change anything. The Great Raven sword was getting closer and closer to me. I could once again feel the ancient and heavy aura from its body. It was different from the previous time. This ancient and heavy aura was like Mount Tai, as though it could instantly crush me. Chapter 6:17. Following the might of the gigantic K sword, more and more gazes were directed towards Zhao Han and me. Vaguely, I seemed to have heard someone predicting my outcome. They said that I would definitely lose if I met a Schwanda Grotto Heavens, Schwanda Grotto Heavens, Seal 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 Grotto Heaven. However, more people were saying that I was overestimating myself. I actually dared to challenge a Schwanda Grotto Heavens sword cultivator and even forced him to use his sword technique. I probably wouldn't even know how I died later on. I laughed in my heart and ignored the voices on the platform. I took out 2 scarlet talismans from my bosom and threw them out. One was a golden light talisman and the other was a scorching sun talisman. I had experimented many times. When these 2 talismans were combined, the defensive effect would definitely multiply. These 2 talismans were one of the 10 great Taoist mantras. Back then, I had used Dao Qi to activate them, but they could only deal with battles in the glory of consciousness realm. However, now that I had activated them with my primordial chi, they were enough to deal with a yang god's celestial master. Under the effect of my primordial chi, the two talismans didn't fly far before they started burning. Then, they turned into a blazing golden barrier in front of me. Zhao Han's gigantic K sword was already ferocious with the support of his sword technique. After absorbing the 2 streaks of sword chi from the armor remodeling sword, its power became even more terrifying. The silver ribbon that was the embodiment of lightning had transformed from an inanimate object into a living python. 2 sarcomas could be vaguely seen on the snake's towering head. That was a sign that it was about to transform into a dragon. It was arrogant and clamoring. Although it didn't make any sound, I felt as though the entire world was filled with its hoarse roars. It was extremely terrifying to listen to. Very quickly, the 3rd streak of sword chi was swallowed by it. This caused the silver giant python to become even more rampant. It clamored and suddenly increased its speed. With a pitch-black sword wrapped around it, it shot towards me like a bolt of lightning. I seemed to be able to see Zhao Han's figure through the golden barrier. After using that technique, he obviously didn't feel good. He sat on the ground like a pile of mud. However, the expression on his face was extremely maniacal. He muttered softly, "Great, great. I didn't expect there to be such a pure sword chi in this world. Zhou-yi, release a few more. Release a few more and my petrifying dragon incantation will be able to achieve great success." As he spoke, he actually roared. Judging from his voice, he sounded like a drug addict who couldn't get his hands on drugs. "Zhou-yi, release a few more streaks of sword chi, release a few more streaks of sword chi." I didn't pay attention to him, as I didn't have the mind to pay attention to him. The endless true dragon energy in the jade bracelet was converted into Tao energy. I felt the Tao energy in my body. Even though it had recovered a lot, it was still far from enough. It was far from enough to be considered as the opponent of the coiling dragon petrification incantation. I held my breath and watched. The silver python was about to hit the barrier created by the golden talismans. My heart tightened. I opened my mouth and spat out the Xian Yuan sword. It had only been a few days since I had swallowed the Xian Yuan sword into my body. The secret manual that Ah Mo's teacher had given me said that before the nourishment was complete, I must not summon the sword to use. It would be fine if it didn't bleed, but once it did, it would definitely affect the compatibility between the sword and its master. Because of that, I didn't take out the Xian Yuan sword at the beginning. Instead, I used the armor dismantling sword to deal with Zhao Han. However, at that moment, with that wild momentum, if I didn't take out the Xian Yuan sword, my chances of winning would be less than 30% under Zhao Han's crazy attack. So, I had no choice but to take out the Xian Yuan sword in front of the blessed paradises. Once the sword was taken out, it was effective. Zhao Hao called the Xian Yuan sword the king's sword. Hence, its name, Zhu, was the king of all swords. Zhao Han's great ravager was powerful and comparable to the armor dismantling sword. However, compared to the king's sword, it was like a mayfly, not even worth mentioning. So, when the Xian Yuan sword was taken out, the giant python that was coiling around the great ravager stopped. It trembled crazily in front of the golden barrier. Even though the golden barrier was right in front of it, it didn't dare to go any further. King's sword. Feeling the Xian Yuan sword's aura, Zhao Han crawled up from the ground like a mad dog. He looked at me with a passionate gaze. After Zhao Han stood up, he bit his middle finger and forced out a drop of blood. He flicked his finger towards the great ravager's sword and said crazily, "It's mine! It's mine! This king's sword is mine." Blood was the location of a cultivator's essence, chi, and soul. It was mainly used at the tip of the tongue and the tip of the middle finger. It was also known as the blood of pure yang. The yang energy was the heaviest. Every bit of it consumed would bring great harm to the cultivator's body. However, at the cost of it, it could allow the cultivator's power to increase in a short period of time. It was similar to sacrificing one's lifespan, but the power and harm were slightly inferior. Even so, Zhao Han's actions surprised me. After receiving Zhao Han's blood, the wild python's trembling became much smaller. However, it still didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Zhao Han was unwilling to give up. He spat out 3 drops of blood consecutively. Only then did the wild python stop trembling. In Zhao Han's blood, the huge python glared at me fiercely. It seemed as though it could charge at me at any time. Seeing this, I felt my hair stand on end. I knew that the barrier formed by the Golden Light Talisman and the Fierce Yang Talisman wouldn't be able to block Zhao Han's attack. Thus, I gripped the Xian Yuan sword tightly and prepared to fight the wild python. However, at that moment, just as my left hand was placed on the hilt of the Xian Yuan sword, a voice sounded from the bottom of my heart. Xian de Zhao family's petrifying dragon spell? I didn't think that after so many years, there would still be people who practice such a strenuous and unrewarding sword art. A Xian Yuan sword? When did such a divine weapon appear? Hearing that, I looked around the stage. With the protection of the invisible barrier, there was no one else on the stage besides me and that fatty Zhao Han. Who's talking? The voice sounded old and even familiar. However, I couldn't remember where I'd heard this voice before. Seeming to understand what I meant, the voice continued, "There's no need to look. I'm in your hand, the armor-stripping sword." I lowered my head to take a look. I didn't know when the old sword started to emit a clear light. Seeing that, I finally understood. I had heard that voice before. It didn't come from anywhere else, but from Song Feng, the old man who gave me the armor-stripping sword. Their voices were similar, but if I listened carefully, there were many differences. Just as I understood, the voice sounded again. "Are you afraid of him? That shouldn't be. Not to mention the Xian Yuan sword, even if you only had the armor-stripping sword, you shouldn't be afraid of that fatty even if he used a method to reduce his lifespan." Sacrificing lifespan? I was shocked and looked at Zhao Han. I didn't know when that fatty had started to form hand seals. I couldn't be more familiar with those hand seals. When I first stepped into the cultivation world, I saw it on Zhao Yongquan's hand. After that, in the Yinshang royal tomb, I saw it more than once. However, at that time, they were using such methods to protect their lives. We were just fighting, so why did it have to be like this? Why did he have to sacrifice his lifespan and prevent his cultivation from progressing for 10 years, just to defeat me? Looking at the Xian Yuan sword, I suddenly understood. It was all for it. Just as I was shocked, Zhao Han finished forming his hand seals. He pointed with both hands, and a blood light landed on the Mang in front of me. With the help that Zhao Han sacrificed his lifespan, the Mang instantly came back to life. It twisted its bloody body and charged towards me. It was as I thought. The barrier formed by the Golden Light Talisman and the Fierce Sun Talisman was useless in front of it. It was like golden paper, disappearing the moment it came into contact with it. Without the barrier blocking it, the sweet smell of blood on the Mang's body instantly filled my nostrils. Although the Mang was strong, I couldn't let it do as it pleased. Thus, I frantically circulated my true essence and prepared to use the Xian Yuan sword and armor-stripping sword as a counterattack. However, at that moment, the voice from the armor-stripping sword sounded out again. "Brat, put away your Xian Yuan sword. This giant python is stained with the blood of the Xian de Zhao family. If you meet it, do you still want to practice their imperial sword technique?" I wanted to retort, but the voice continued, "Don't worry. Leave the rest to me. The Zhao family's petrifying dragon technique relies on absorbing other people's sword energy to grow. However, not all sword chi can be digested by them." Although it was the first time I heard this voice, the situation was urgent. I couldn't think of any other way. Moreover, what he said was reasonable. No matter if it was the matter of me practicing the Zhao family's imperial sword technique or Zhao Han's petrifying dragon technique, it was the same as what I had guessed. I didn't think too much about it. I thought quickly and put away the Xian Yuan sword. After I finished doing that, the voice from the armor-stripping sword continued, "Repeat after me. The one who wields this sword shall extinguish all desires. All spirits and monsters shall be cut down by this sword." I didn't have time to think as Kuang Meng was about to charge in front of me. I could only wait and read. "The one who wields this sword shall extinguish all desires. All spirits and monsters shall be cut down by this sword." This was the inscription that was carved on the armor-stripping sword. It was strange. It wasn't that I hadn't read it before, but there wasn't any difference. However, this time, I followed the voice from the sword and my body moved along with it. Under the control of that power, I gripped the sword with both hands and swung the armor-stripping sword above my head. Then, I slashed downward. It was such a simple movement, but it triggered the true qi in my entire body to surge crazily towards the armor-stripping sword. In the blink of an eye, the berserk serpent landed in front of me, bringing with it a gust of sweet blood. At that moment, the armor-stripping sword finally finished charging its power. Following my movements, it spat out a long sword energy, which sliced through the huge python's mouth. From head to tail, the giant python was cut in half. After completing those movements, I finally felt a little exhausted. However, it was fortunate that I was a dual practitioner of witchcraft. Even though the attack from the armor-stripping sword had used up all of my true qi, my shaman qi and true qi weren't damaged in the slightest. It was because of its support that I was able to stand on the stage unscathed. That sword energy left as quickly as it came. In a short while, it was absorbed by the restriction at the edge of the stage and disappeared. I had waited until now to finally see Zhao Han's figure. After the previous battle and the direct attack from the armor-stripping sword, he had already lost all of his strength and fainted on the stage. After confirming the outcome of the battle, I looked towards the fatty's stage. Chapter 6:18. Two cultivators wearing 3 Emperor's Heavenly Abodes robes ran up to the stage and carried the unconscious Zhao Han off the stage. The staff in charge of the Heavenly Abode excitedly ran up to the stage and smilingly confirmed the results of the competition before letting me off the stage. The organizer of the Heavenly Grand Ritual was Wanwu Heavenly Abode, so the people in charge of fairness were naturally from there. My victory in this competition indicated that Wanwu Grotto Heaven was one step closer to the next round of the competition. Naturally, they would be happy. However, I couldn't be happy. Because I had used the Xian Yuan sword, I had once again become the target of public criticism. First it was the divine beast Qilin, now it was the divine weapon Xian Yuan sword. I could feel the jealousy and even resentment in the gazes that landed on me. I glanced at the stage. I didn't know when the Spiritual Mountain Blessed Lands competition had ended. Lu Zhenyang was wearing a mask as he sat on the viewing platform. I couldn't see his expression, but from the expressions of the two brothers, Lu Qingyi and Lu Qingping, beside him, it seemed that they had already obtained the opportunity to enter the next round. Sensing that I was looking at him, Lu Zhenyang turned his head to look at me. His gaze was filled with jealousy and resentment, burning like fire. I reckoned that he would need my help in the future, so he nodded and looked away. Soon after, I noticed another strange gaze. It was the gaze of that old monster from Precious Mysterious Abode, Song Feng. He only stared at me with a hint of fanaticism in his eyes. Because of the voice in the armor-stripping sword, my impression of this old monster had increased. However, the fatty and Ah Fu were still fighting on the stage. Even though I wanted to thank this old monster, I wasn't in a hurry. I only nodded at him before looking at the other 2 stages of Wanwu Heavenly Abode. The fatty was also a cultivator and had the Tao Qi cultivation of the glorious knowledge Great Circle. With this kind of cultivation, he would be a pillar of the sect in the mortal world. However, he cultivated in the cultivation method of the divination sect and lacked battle power. His actual battle experience could be counted on one hand. In the previous round, he was able to defeat the glorious knowledge Earth Master from the heavenly abode and blessed land. Apart from the mysteriousness of the formation, luck played a significant role. However, it is different today. On the surface, we are fighting against the three Emperor Well Grotto Heaven, but in reality, we are fighting against the people of Schwanda Grotto Heaven. The sword cultivators of Schwanda Grotto Heaven were already very strong. In addition, they came prepared this time. Fatty's side would definitely not be taken lightly. Ah Fu was a veteran Yang spirit celestial master of Wanwu Grotto Heaven. His cultivation was at the great perfection of Yang spirit. He was only one step away from breaking through to the realm of Yang spirit ascension. I've seen him fight more than once. He's quite powerful, and his grasp of timing is also perfect. I'm very confident in him. I first glanced at Ah Fu's arena. At this moment, he and Ji Wuchang were locked in a fierce battle. The two Yang spirits met in the arena from time to time, colliding with each other and releasing a great amount of Jinqi. Sometimes they fought in the air, and raging flames and strong winds filled the sky. I've seen Ah Fu's primordial spirit before. Last time in Chio's shoulder mound, his celestial master Yang spirit used a sword to fight against Lu Zhenyang. However, at that time the sword was just an illusion. Now it seems to be no different from the real thing. When it's used, its power is much stronger than before. However, Ji Wuchang's Yang spirit surprised me. The Yang spirit was golden in color and was the same size as Ah Fu's Yang spirit. However, the difference was that Ah Fu's Yang spirit used a sword, while Ji Wuchang's Yang spirit used a five-clawed golden dragon. The magical weapons used by the celestial master Yang spirit were very different depending on the cultivator's cultivation method and perception of heaven and earth. Not to mention anything else, just taking Ah Fu, Ah Shi, and Ah Shou as examples, one could see the difference between them. They all came from Wanwu Cave and practiced the same cultivation method, but the magical instruments used by their Yang spirits were all different. Ah Fu used a sword, while Ah Shi and Ah Shou used a palm leaf fan and a jade flute respectively. Therefore, I didn't find it strange that the magical weapon used by Ji Wuchang's celestial master Yang spirit was different from Ah Fu's. What was strange was that he used a dragon, a five-clawed golden dragon that had basically turned into a substance. Before the battle began, I felt another pressure coming from Ji Wuchang. Now, in front of the golden dragon, the pressure was like waves, constantly slapping at me. Even through the barrier of the restriction, it gave me a sense of urgency. The dragon was the totem of the famous Chinese race. It was a supreme divine beast, not inferior to the Qilin. Moreover, in the inheritance background of the Three Emperor Well, there was a saying that the Yellow Emperor cultivated in the Daluo mountain and finally ascended on a true dragon. It seemed that they had obtained the Yellow Emperor's inheritance. At this time, Ji Wuchang controlled the golden dragon to attack Ah Fu. The scales on the golden dragon's neck moved, then it suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a golden flame. Dragon breath. Although I had never seen a true dragon, I could guess what it was based on the golden dragon's movements. The flame spurted out of the golden dragon's mouth like a pillar, but it suddenly forked 3 feet away from Ah Fu and turned into an arc, covering him. It was really a good move. Although Ji Wuchang's golden dragon wasn't a true dragon, it had the power of the Yang spirit and the magic of the cultivation method. Although its power wasn't as strong as a true dragon's dragon breath, it wasn't much weaker. Ah Fu stood opposite him, his Yang spirit floating in the air, just in time to be surrounded by the dragon breath. At this time, he had already retreated to the edge. Although the arena was protected by a restriction, no matter what kind of power the attack was, it was different for the people in the arena. The restriction wouldn't stop them. Therefore, if Ah Fu took another step back, he would be defeated. The golden dragon breath was getting closer and closer, reflecting off Fu's old face. He was obviously aware of this, but he was still unwilling to admit defeat. He formed a seal with both hands and controlled his celestial master's yang spirit to merge with the magic tool. It turned into a bright stream of light and rushed toward the dragon breath that surrounded him. The two met in the blink of an eye. Nothing earth-shattering happened, but when Ah Fu's yang spirit passed through the dragon breath, there was a sizzling sound, like the sound of lard dripping on charcoal. Then, the dragon breath dissipated. I saw Ah Fu frown, and the stream of light formed by the celestial master's yang spirit dimmed a lot. Obviously, although Ah Fu had won just now, he must have consumed a lot of energy. On the other hand, Ji Wuchang's expression was the same as usual, as if he had expected it. He controlled the golden dragon to rush forward and fight with the stream of light that Ah Fu had transformed into. Seeing this, I couldn't help but frown. To be able to fight on par with Ah Fu, Ji Wuchang's strength was definitely not weak. Behind the three emperors' well was the inheritance of the Yellow Emperor, the founder of China. Even if the inheritance had been stolen and there was a gap, under his leadership, the three emperors' well shouldn't have fallen to the point where it needed the help of Xuande Grotto Heaven. But why did they cooperate? The more I thought about it, the more serious my gaze became. Ji Wuchang seemed to sense my gaze. He was slightly distracted during the battle and looked over at me. Then, he focused all his attention on fighting Ah Fu. Ah Fu was the strongest person in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, and his grasp of battle opportunities had already reached perfection. Naturally, he wouldn't miss this opportunity. With a wave of his hand, the stream of light formed by the celestial master's yang spirit surged again. No matter how fast Ji Wuchang's reaction was, the golden dragon couldn't dodge this attack. In just an instant, Ah Fu had the upper hand in this battle. Before this battle, whether it was me or Wanwu Grotto Heaven, the three emperors' well Grotto Heaven, we were in a state of harmony. The only serious relationship between us was the ranking in the All-Heaven competition and the distribution of the dragon vein behind the ranking. But before going on stage, Ji Wuchang clearly told me that he didn't care about the distribution of the dragon vein. So what did he care about? Zhao Hao was going against me because of the position of the champion of the blessed Grotto Heaven, Little Mo, and the Xianyuan sword in my hand. Ji Wuchang and Zhao Hao could cooperate because they had a common goal. Judging from Ji Wuchang's words, the possibility that their common goal was the position of champion could be ruled out. Moreover, there could only be one champion. According to Zhao Hao's haggling personality, he definitely wouldn't share the position of champion with anyone. Then, there was Little Mo. Zhao Hao had always viewed Little Mo as his personal property, so he definitely wouldn't expose it to Ji Wuchang. Even if he did, Ji Wuchang wouldn't be moved. Although the innate sword embryo was mysterious, it was also a blessed Grotto Heaven. What kind of genius hadn't the three emperors well Grotto Heaven not seen? Naturally, it wouldn't view Little Mo as important. Then, the only thing left was the Xianyuan sword. Zhao Hao had his eyes on the Xianyuan sword and wanted to take it for himself so that his sword cultivation could take another step forward. The three emperors well Grotto Heaven originated from the Yellow Emperor. The Yellow Emperor was also known as Xianyuan, and the Xianyuan sword was his magical artifact. Thinking about the Xianyuan sword, I suddenly recalled the incident of the three emperors well Grotto Heaven's inheritance being stolen. Could it be that the Xianyuan sword was the inheritance that was stolen from the three emperors well? After thinking about it, I felt that it was impossible. The Xianyuan sword was something that Nangong had taken from the Yinshang royal tomb. How could it be related to the three emperors well Grotto Heaven? Ah Fu and Ji Wuchang's match was nearing its end. As long as there were no accidents, Ah Fu would definitely win this match and send us to the fourth round of the arena. With my victory and Ah Fu's imminent victory, the victory of Fatty's subordinate was no longer that important. I looked at Fatty's arena. I thought that he would have a hard time, but I didn't think that he would have an easier time than Ah Fu and I. This fellow sat cross-legged on the arena. Next to him was the Buddha formation that I had seen the night before, which firmly enveloped him. In front of him, the thin cultivator from the Xuanda Grotto heaven raised his sword and continuously charged forward. His sword energy was sharp, and his spirit was unparalleled. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get close to Fatty. Every time he got closer, Fatty would take out one talisman after another. He would either summon a stream of sword chi or release a fireball, forcing the sword cultivator to retreat. Seeing that he had succeeded a few times, Fatty became even more complacent and took the initiative to provoke the sword cultivator. Chapter 6:19. Seeing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Based on the Fatty's previous fight, it wasn't hard to imagine what he did after he went on stage. It was obvious that he didn't greet the skinny monkey after he went on stage. Instead, he found a place to set up a formation and used his formation as a foundation. No matter how his opponent attacked, he would hide in the formation and only use his talismans to counterattack. The Xianda Cave was a place where sword cultivators, regardless of gender, other than Zhao Han and a few other people, most of them cultivated the fierce and aggressive sword technique. They strived to use their absolute power to crush their opponents and end the battle quickly. Of course, he didn't expect to meet such a wretched opponent like the Fatty in the All-Heaven competition. The first thing he did when he went on stage wasn't greeting his opponent or provoking him. Instead, he found a place to start setting up a formation. Afterwards, he hid in the formation and used his talismans to attack his opponent, which consumed a lot of his Dao Qi. This was enough to make him furious, but what surprised him even more was that Fatty still had the cheek to provoke him after holding on for so long with such a wretched manner. He was instantly infuriated. Using his treasured sword as a guide, he blocked another round of raging fire and steadied himself 10 meters away from the Fatty. He sneered at the Fatty. "Damn Fatty hiding in the array, if you have the ability, come out and try without the talisman. Let's see if you can withstand 10 moves from me." This was the simplest way to provoke the Fatty into coming out of the formation. However, it seemed that he had miscalculated. Although the Fatty was impulsive sometimes and didn't think before he spoke, he was still able to keep his cool at critical moments. He sat in the formation and didn't care about the Fatty calling him a damn Fatty. Instead, he took out a talisman and said in a strange tone, "This fight depends on ability. The sword in your hand is your ability, while the talismans in my hand and the formation around me are my abilities. The current situation is that you're using your ability to challenge my ability, but you can't enter my body. Not only are you not reflecting on your own abilities, but you're also accusing me of being stronger and saying that you're not a match for me. I don't know how Xuanda Paradise educated you to produce such a shameless person like you." The Fatty's words were fresh and refined, making people's eyes light up. It was obvious that he didn't dare to go out and fight, but he was saying that someone else's ability wasn't good and that he was shameless. Following his train of thought, even I felt that his shameless words were somewhat reasonable. On the viewing platform, the people who were watching the Fatty's match were amused by his words. I glanced over and saw that the people from Xuanda Paradise had just walked down from the stage. After hearing the Fatty's words, their joy of advancing to the next round disappeared, and they all looked at the Fatty with gloomy expressions. As the leader of the Xuanda Grotto, Zhao Hao could not hold back the anger in his heart. He shouted at the person who was fighting the Fatty, "Li Yuan, why are you wasting your breath on him? Use your sword technique and kill this Fatty for me." I knew why Zhao Hao was so angry. He was the leader of the Xianda Paradise and possessed the one and only sword cultivation technique in the world. His battle prowess was superior to his peers in the same realm. He looked at everyone with an air of arrogance. He was the leader of Schwanda Paradise, and had the one and only sword cultivation technique in the world. His battle prowess was superior to others in the same realm. He couldn't help but be angry when the fatty said that sword cultivation was worthless and even Schwanda Paradise was belittled. While I was sighing at the fatty's art of killing two birds with one stone, I couldn't help but worry. I didn't know how powerful the sword technique was before, but I had just experienced Zhao Han's petrifying dragon spell. Afterwards, it was only with the help of the voice in the armor-removing sword that I was able to end the battle so early. If not, I don't know how long I would have to fight with Zhao Han. Thus, I knew how powerful it was. It was true that the fatty's cultivation was similar to Li Yuan's, but he didn't have enough battle experience and had never faced Schwanda Paradise's sword technique. No matter how powerful the talisman that Wang Can had given him was, he would definitely have to suffer in the following battles. I turned to take a look. A Fu had already defeated Ji Wubing. Our Wanwu Paradise's advancement to the fourth round was already set in stone. There was no need for the fatty to take this risk. Thinking about that, I took a step forward and said to the fatty, "Fatty, don't force yourself. We've already won 2 rounds. We've already won." The fatty heard my voice, but he didn't even turn his head and replied, "Third baby, don't worry. I've already calculated everything. Have you forgotten what cultivation technique I practice? I said that I'll help you teach that Schwanda Paradise brat a lesson. I'll definitely help you." After hearing the fatty's words, my heart lit up. The fatty practiced an experiential cultivation technique. Even though formations were his forte, he was still best at calculating the mysteries of the heavens. For him to be so confident, he must have predicted Li Yuan's outcome when he was dealing with him. Thinking about that, my worried heart calmed down. However, I still couldn't help but warn him to be careful of Li Yuan's sword technique. Then, I retreated a few steps and met up with Ah Fu, who was waiting at the side. After receiving Zhao Hao's instructions, Li Yuan didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation. He tossed the slender sword into the air and circulated his Tao energy with both of his hands, continuously forming hand seals. This was the prelude to activating the sword technique. At that moment, Li Yuan looked at me and said to the fatty, "You really don't know what's good for you. Don't you know who you've offended? You can't even protect your own life, yet you still have the mood to care about others. And you, fatty, since you like to hide in formations so much, I'll let you try Grandpa Yuan's prairie-blazing sword technique. I'll let you become a real fatty." Don't know what's good for me? I looked at Li Yuan. Although Zhao Hao was strong, how could I be someone who would sit and wait for death? If Zhao Hao wanted to kill me, then we'd have to see if he had the ability to do so. The fatty obviously understood what I meant, but the smile on his face didn't change. He said as usual, "If you can't win in the arena, then what's the point of just talking tough? Come on, this Lord Fatty is already prepared. Quickly show me that whatever prairie-blazing sword art of yours." After the previous argument, Li Yuan clearly knew that he wasn't the fatty's opponent in terms of words. Thus, he simply shut his mouth and used all his strength to activate the sword technique. Seeing this, the fatty became even more complacent. He took out a silver talisman from his arms and praised Li Yuan, "Good boy." The blue veins on Li Yuan's forehead bulged. He opened his mouth, but in the end, no sound came out. After a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "Go!" As soon as his voice fell, the sword in the air turned red. The next second, like a fish leaping over the dragon gate, it soared into the sky. The fatty finally became serious. He pinched the silver talisman with 2 fingers of his right hand, injected his genuine essence, and threw it into the sky. As soon as the silver talisman fell from the fatty's hand, it burned by itself. Then, in less than a second, the talisman turned invisible and shot out a silver lightning bolt. This kind of talisman was called the Heavenly Tribulation Talisman. After being ignited with genuine essence, it could release a heavenly tribulation thunder, which was extremely strong. Among all the talismans that Wonkin had brought, besides the golden talisman, it was the most powerful one. Since the fatty had been able to deal with Li Yuan for so long, he had obviously remembered all the things I had told him before. However, although this kind of talisman was powerful, it was not a complete form of the heavenly tribulation thunder. In front of Li Yuan's sword skill with all his strength, he was afraid that it was still no match for him. Obviously, the fatty was also aware of this, so he did not dare to be careless. After throwing out the silver talisman, he ran his Taoist chi and kept making hand seals for a moment, as if he was preparing for a big move. The bright red sword with a long flame tail leaped into the air, suddenly turned at the highest point, and with the tip of the sword pointing to the ground, it fell heavily on the fatty. At this moment, the tribulation thunder transformed by the silver talisman also rushed up. In a flash, there was a burst of explosion, illuminating the whole venue. The tribulation thunder was born from the talisman. When the talisman floated away from the fatty's hand, it had nothing to do with the fatty. Therefore, no matter how big the movement caused by the tribulation thunder and the sword was, it would not have anything to do with the fatty. But Li Yuan was not so lucky. The sword was a Taoist sword that was connected to his mind, and he had used the sword skill that he had used Taoist Qi as a guide. Just now, when he had directly collided with the tribulation thunder, although he had dispersed the tribulation thunder, the remaining power of the tribulation thunder had landed on his body through the connection between them. After using the prairie fire sword skill, Li Yuan was already an arrow at the end of its flight. After suffering the remaining power of the tribulation thunder, he could no longer hold it in and spat out a large mouthful of blood, which filled the air like a bloody mist. But he did not fall because of this. Instead, he clenched his teeth and stabilized his body on the arena. His hands made hand seals, and he forcefully controlled the sword to fall towards the fatty. Obviously, the fatty had already realized this. He did not even look at Li Yuan, and continued to make hand seals with all his attention, his speed becoming faster and faster. At this moment, the treasured sword that was falling from the sky suddenly changed. The red flame tail that was dragging behind it slowly extended. From afar, it looked like a red peacock spreading its tail. As the distance between the sword and the ground continued to decrease, the entire sky above the arena was filled with the sword's red flames. Even though we were separated by a barrier and were far away, I could still feel the terrifying heat coming towards me. This temperature was different from the dragon breath of Ji Wubink's Yang God Golden Dragon. The dragon breath was a flame, and although it also carried this pressure, it gave people a feeling of warmth. Li Yuan's prairie fire sword skill, on the other hand, gave people the feeling that they were standing in a bonfire. That terrifying temperature was roasting their skin, bringing with it a burning pain. Seeing this, Ah Fu, who was beside me, could no longer hold it in. He whispered in my ear, "Saint, let young Master Lin admit defeat. We have already won 2 matches and have already entered the 4th round." Young Master Lin, I knew that he was worried about the fatty, but wasn't I the same? But since the fatty was so confident just now, I couldn't stop him even if I wanted to. Moreover, at this time, even if the fatty admitted defeat, with Li Yuan's appearance, would he still be able to withdraw this monstrous sword? Obviously not. I shook my head and interrupted Ah Fu, "I believe in the fatty. Uncle Fu, you don't have to worry. He will be fine." At this moment, the fatty was still sitting cross-legged in the Buddha formation. It was unknown when the formation had been activated by him, but it had already transformed into the sword of a flaming peacock. The tip of the sword pointed straight at the tip of the 4-cornered pagoda. The pagoda instantly shattered, and with an unstoppable momentum, it rushed towards the fatty. Seeing that the fatty was in imminent danger, he didn't seem to notice it at all. He turned a deaf ear to the high temperature around him. Just as the sword energy was about to reach his body, the fatty's hand finally stopped. A yellow smoke floated up from the ground and firmly wrapped around him. Chapter 6:20. I've never seen the Yellow River of Nine Bends Formation, and I only learned of its name from Tong Tong when I left home this morning. Fatty said that it was the most mysterious formation passed down by the ancestors of the divination sect. Once the formation was activated, yellow smoke would spread for 150 kilometers, and its defensive power was like the Yellow River, endless. Back then, the old senior of the divination sect had set up this formation with the cultivation of an early-stage Seal Heavenly Master, and blocked 3 great Seal Heavenly Masters in one fell swoop. One of them accidentally entered the formation, thinking that he could kill the person in charge of the formation and win in one fell swoop. However, he didn't expect to go for wool and come home shorn. Instead, he lost his cultivation that he had painstakingly cultivated for decades. If Fatty's description was true, with this formation, Li Yuan clearly wouldn't be able to gain an advantage. Very soon, the Fatty confirmed my conjecture. His hand seals stopped, but the magic formation surged and emitted yellow smoke. In just a short moment it had covered the entire arena. From its momentum, it didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Li Yuan stood where he was and watched the yellow smoke slowly spread over his knees. He couldn't help but spit and said, "Damn Fatty, you're about to die. Let's see what tricks you can play." With that, his hand signs changed, and he controlled the treasure sword to ruthlessly fall on Fatty. The space that the Buddha formation could support was no more than 10 meters, and the sword technique with the power of a prairie fire had long broken through its defense. Now, with Li Yuan's full force, it landed in front of Fatty in an instant. Even from afar, I could smell a burning smell. Fatty was originally sitting cross-legged on the ground, but under the yellow smoke, I couldn't see him anymore. I didn't know what he did in the yellow smoke, but the yellow smoke suddenly increased in speed. Just as the tip of the sword was about to land in front of him, the yellow smoke suddenly evaporated and wrapped around the flames in the air like dumplings. At this moment, the space in the restriction barrier was completely filled with the red of the flames and the yellow of the sand. There was almost no gap, let alone Fatty and Li Yuan's figures. Half of it was the blazing flames, and the other half was the vast yellow smoke. Ah Fu was shocked by the scene before him. He swallowed his saliva and asked, "Young Master Lin, what formation is this? Why is it so mystical? This old servant has lived for most of his life and has never seen such a formation." Actually, it wasn't just him. Even I, who was already prepared, was shocked by the scene that the Fatty had created. I told Fu the name of the Nine Bends Yellow River Great Formation. Then, my eyes returned to the arena. The Nine Bends Yellow River Formation was indeed extraordinary. Although he did not know if the legend of it being able to cross realms to fight one against 3 and reducing the cultivation of others was true, its miraculousness was clear at a glance. In less than a minute after Fatty activated the formation, the continuous stream of yellow smoke reached a state of balance with the raging fire. The prairie blazing sword incantation, which was originally unparalleled in power and blazing fiercely, was defeated in front of the yellow smoke. In an instant it retreated. Its figure shrank again and again, and its steps also retreated again and again, but in the end, it was unable to escape the encirclement of the yellow smoke. The treasured sword let out a mournful cry, and the rising yellow smoke once again soared, instantly occupying the entire space on the arena. Not long after, a scream came from the yellow smoke. This scream came from Li Yuan. Although it was still not clear what had happened in the yellow smoke, the result was already obvious. After receiving Zhao Hao's instructions, Li Yuan, who did not hesitate to use the prairie blazing sword incantation at the cost of his entire body's true essence, was defeated by the Fatty, who could only struggle from the beginning and use talismans to delay time. Although this outcome was not beyond my expectations, it made the surrounding onlookers raise their eyebrows. Before using the prairie blazing sword incantation, Zhao Hao was still clamoring for Li Yuan to subdue the fatty with his sword, but in less than 10 minutes, Li Yuan, who had the winning ticket in his hand, had been defeated by the fatty. Moreover, it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. Thinking of this, I smiled and looked at Zhao Hao. This guy's expression was not good at all. After noticing that I was looking at him, he gritted his teeth and said, "Zhou Yi, just you wait." After saying that, he did not even care about Li Yuan and hurriedly left the venue. Because of Zhao Hao's warning at the beginning, the battle between the fatty and Li Yuan had unknowingly become the focus of everyone's attention. Now that they had made such a big fuss, they had basically gathered the attention of the entire Heavens stewardship. In the beginning, those people might have watched the battle with the mood of watching a good show, or with a bit of pity. But now, no matter what purpose they had in watching the battle, they looked at the fatty and the arena with admiration. I smiled faintly and admired the fatty in my heart. The divination sect was not good at fighting. In the Blessed Enclave there were divination masters similar to the divination sect, so they knew very well. As a divination master, he had defeated a sword cultivator with outstanding combat power in the same realm. Such a record was probably the same as the fatty's previous record of using the formation to exhaust the opponent's Taoist Qi to win. It was the first record in the Blessed Enclave. The yellow smoke on the arena turned into a tornado and gradually retreated to the Earth's core. Finally, the figures of the fatty and Li Yuan appeared on the yellow arena. The fatty was no different from before. He was still sitting cross-legged on the ground. When he noticed that I was looking at him, he winked at me. However, Li Yuan wasn't so lucky. Before the Nine Bends Yellow River formation was activated, he was standing 10 meters away from the fatty. But now, he was lying next to the fatty. That overbearing treasured sword had turned into a pile of scrap metal and landed next to him. I hastily walked forward and prepared to welcome the fatty. At that moment, the people from the Three Emperors' heavenly abode also rushed onto the arena. They looked at me with deep meaning before leaving the arena with Li Yuan. When I came to the fatty's side, he smiled at me and said, "How was it? My performance wasn't bad, right?" This fellow was still as cocky as ever. Seeing that he had just won the battle, I didn't refute him. I only smiled and scolded him. I extended my hand and pulled him up to the viewing platform. On the way, Ah Fu also rushed over to welcome me. Together with me, he carried the fatty to the viewing platform. After checking on the fatty's situation, he continuously praised the fatty as a young talent. The word modesty did not exist in fatty's dictionary. He laughed and agreed without a trace of politeness. The arena that the Wanwu heavenly abode had arranged was extremely large, enough to accommodate 10 battles at the same time. Today was already the third round of the all-heaven competition. Only the 32 blessed paradises were qualified to participate. In other words, there were only 16 battles to be held. Thus, all the battles today were held at the same time. After the fatty's battle ended, more and more battles also came to an end. The heavenly abode of the West City, where the Han family was located, had already finished their battles. As for the mysterious Zhu Yuk of the Chen province, the tribulation pills of Mount Gazao, and the other low-ranked blessed paradises, although they had performed well, they were still lacking in strength. In this round, they had finally reached the end and lost to the experts of the 10 great paradises. As for the Lu Liang Mountain Grotto, where Lin Shui was located, they once again made a comeback and entered the top 16. I paid special attention to the battles of the Lu Liang Mountain Grotto. Not only were there people who had fought before, but there was also someone from the Changshan Mountain Grotto. It was obvious that the Changshan Mountain Grotto and the Lu Liang Mountain Grotto had joined forces. Although the Corpse Yin sect had perished, the remnants were still there. In addition to them, as the battles continued, the top 10 heavenly abode qualified to enter the 4th round were determined. In this round, someone from the 10 great paradises finally fell from their pedestal. This heavenly abode was called the Kwa Tsang Mountain Grotto, also known as the Ching Da Hidden Mysterious Heavenly Abode. It was located in the northern part of the Magu Yen mountain range in the Chuzhou province's Luan County. It was ruled by Duke Juanzi of the Northern Sea. The entrance of the cave faced the majestic Kwa Tsang mountain range in the east. Emperor Jinzong of the Song dynasty gave it the name True Condensation Palace. The locals called it the 45th Cave. It was one of the orthodox Taoist cultivation grounds. According to legend, since the beginning of the Eastern Han Dynasty, the Kwa Tsang Grotto was known as the Taoist Grotto. During the Eastern Han Dynasty, the Tai Chi master, Su Lai Lei, took a fancy to this place and became the first cave manager. He was in charge of a 300-kilometer radius around the Kwa Tsang Cave. Since then, the Kwa Tsang Cave was blessed. According to historical records, there were 12 Taoist masters who became immortals in the northern Song dynasty. They were Su Lai Lei and Wang Yuan from the Eastern Han dynasty, Zuoxiai Guxian and Kai Jing from the Three Kingdoms Wu, Zhengxiuan, Ping Zhongjie and Yang Yi from the Jin dynasty, Yi Zongji from the Tang dynasty, and Chen Huizhen, Ma Zishan and Wang Chongyu from the Song dynasty. Within the jurisdiction of Kwa Tsang Cave, the legend of Wang Yuan and Magu meeting in Kai Jing's residence was passed down to the later generations, leaving behind such idioms as the blue sea turns into mulberry fields and Magu scratches an itch. Kai Jing's old residence was built as the Hidden Truth Palace by Emperor Liang Wu in the Southern Dynasty. During the Kwa Tsang Cave's heyday, it had a vast area. According to 1148 AD, during the reign of Emperor Gaozong of the Southern Song dynasty, it had 1,169 mu of farmland, 1,276 mu of land, and 1,858 mu of forest. It showed the importance and prosperity of the Kwa Tsang Cave during the Tang and Song dynasties. Chen Renyu, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War in the Southern Song dynasty, had written the inscription "The Farm of the Hidden Truth Palace" on a stone tablet. Gu Xian, the Taoist master of Chongying, had built the Chuanxi Temple near the heavenly abode during the reign of Sun Quan of the Three Kingdoms. In the third year of Yonghe of the Eastern Jin dynasty, which was 347 AD, the Taoist master of the Eastern Jin dynasty, Yang Yi, the younger brother of the first county magistrate of Lun Yang Exen, from Xiangyang, Hubei, was a county lieutenant in Jiajiang County, Sichuan Province. After he was dismissed, he came to the Taoist master of the Kwa Tsang Cave to cultivate. Later on, he became an immortal. After listening to Wang Can's information about the Kwa Tsang Cave, I couldn't help but feel strange. Logically speaking, with Kwokang Mountain having such a profound heritage background and being able to ascend to the throne of the 10 major grotto heavens, the cultivation resources and disciples they had accumulated over the years were definitely not something the small grotto heavens outside of the 10 major grotto heavens could compare to. Who would have thought that they would be eliminated in this round? It should be noted that the best ranking they could get after this round was less than 10 places, which meant they would be in the middle of the 36 minor heavens. They would never be able to enter the top 10 heavens. From then on, the Kwa Tsang Cave's status was much higher than that of the top 10 heavens. I was in the arena at that time, so I didn't pay attention to the details. I felt sorry for them, but I was more curious about their opponent. Since they could eliminate the top 10 heavens, they couldn't be ordinary people. After asking Wang Can, I found out who their opponents were. Lu Zhenyang led the team from the spiritual mountain. Just as I had guessed, Lu Zhenyang took out the Chiyu tomahawk and gave it to Lu Qingyi. That was why Lu Zhenyang and Lu Qingyi won easily. Chapter 6:21. Lu Zhenyang wasn't a good person. Originally, his victory over Kwokang Mountain's Grotto Heaven wasn't a good thing for me. However, because he promised to concede defeat if he met me, I hoped that he would go as far as possible in the Heavenly Grand Ritual. It would be best if he met me in the arena for the championship. That way, he would be able to eliminate more than half of the opponents for me and Wangu Mountain's Grotto Heaven. Moreover, at this stage, the opponents were all very powerful existences. Lu Zhenyang eliminated any Grotto Heaven. Regardless of whether it was me or the current Wangu Mountain's Grotto Heaven, it was indeed a good thing. The world was truly unpredictable. Who would have known about the things that happened today yesterday? As one of the 10 great Grotto Heaven, Quokang Mountain's Grotto Heaven, I and Lu Zhenyang, who was absolutely irreconcilable, had become temporary comrades. These originally inconceivable things had actually happened today. As I sighed, Ah Fu closed his eyes beside me and began to recover his Tao energy in preparation for the 4th round tomorrow. The fatty was extremely excited as he rambled on about how he had calculated everything on the arena. He had used the talismans to exhaust his opponent Li Yuan's Tao energy and finally used the 9 Bends Yellow River formation to turn the tables. Towards the end, he even started to show off to me. How was it? Didn't I say that my 9 Bends Yellow River formation is amazing? What happened last night was an exception. That big dog of yours is too amazing. Although it can break any formation, it still has to fight against a normal person. Look, I've basically completely grasped the 9 Bends Yellow River formation. If the people from Xuanda Mountain's Grotto Heaven dare to go up tomorrow, I won't let them have a good time either. I originally thought that the fatty had persisted in fighting Li Yuan on the arena to help me vent my anger. I was extremely moved, but after hearing the fatty's words, my surging gratitude had mostly dissipated. It turned out that this fellow was dissatisfied with how easily his formation had been broken by the Qilin last night. He had risked his life to stay on the arena to prove to me that not only did his formation sound awesome, it was even more awesome when used. As I joked with the fatty, I waited for the last few matches of the 3rd round to begin. As the matches started, the conversation between the fatty and I decreased. He knew that I was paying attention to the matches on the arena and was preparing for tomorrow's match. He couldn't help but mutter, "What's there to look at? If we meet, we just have to fight." After saying that, he imitated Fu and began to adjust his breath to recover his Tao Qi. Wanwu Grotto Heaven, as the top Grotto Heaven, had 4 true dragon veins. The true dragon energy in the entire Grotto Heaven was incomparably dense. Although this was the venue and not the Holy Ji Palace that we lived in, compared to the outside world, it was still a precious place for cultivation. Moreover, the fatty was such a lazy person. It was a good thing that he could actively recover his qi of Tao. I didn't disturb him, and let him continue recovering his qi of Tao. Unexpectedly, after a while, Fatty's snoring came from beside him. I smiled and didn't wake him up. I continued to pay attention to the competition in the arena. The remaining 12 clans would be divided into 6 rounds to begin the competition. Each round included the Yang God Celestial Master, the Seal Celestial Master, and the Knowledge Earth Master. Out of the 3 small rounds, 2 of them would be able to enter the 4th round. Apart from the blessed enclave with deep foundations, some rising stars were finding it increasingly difficult to compete in the arena. After all, there were only a few spiritual mountain-blessed enclave that had a freak like Lu Zhenyang. Hence, at the end of the 3rd round, there weren't any other blessed enclave that managed to enter the 4th round. Those that could participate in the later rounds were mostly the top few clans in the 10 major Grotto Heavens and 36 minor Grotto Heavens. Of course, the spiritual mountain-blessed enclave and Lu Liang mountain-blessed enclave were the exceptions. Although there weren't many battles that day, they lasted for a long time. It wasn't until dusk that the 2 minor Grotto Heavens, whose powers were on par with each other, determined the last person that could enter the next round. I woke Fatty up and prepared to leave. Fu also bade farewell to me and reminded us to rest well. If we had any instructions, we could just tell the servants in Wanwu Grotto Heaven. Fatty and I agreed to it and walked towards the Holy Ji Palace. Although so many unbelievable things had happened today, Fatty had given me a pleasant surprise. He had completely mastered the Yellow River of Nine Bends formation. If it was in the past, it wouldn't be considered much, but the situation was different now. Fu's power wasn't considered to be at the peak among the Yang God celestial masters. I was the one that had the most confidence in the 3 battles. Now that Fatty had completely mastered the formation, he could be considered to be a stable point in the following battles. Even if either Fu or I made any mistakes in the future, it wouldn't affect us entering the next round of the competition. Speaking of which, the elder in Fatty's sect that had created the formation was worthy of being called a monstrous genius. Fatty was able to set up the formation at the perfect realm of the glorious consciousness realm. In terms of attainments in formations, he could be considered to be an unparalleled genius. However, I couldn't let Fatty know about this. If he knew, his tail would be raised to the sky. As for Xuanda Grotto Heaven's Zhao Hao's methods, it wasn't something that I was worried about. Since I had discovered his conspiracy, I just had to be on guard in the following battles. As the saying goes, when the righteous are 1 foot high, the devil is 10. In the end, it mainly depended on our strength. As long as we were strong enough, Xuanda Grotto Heaven's little tricks would be useless. When we returned to the Taoist palace, Fatty was sleepy again. He didn't even want to eat dinner. After saying goodbye to me, he was about to go to his bedroom, but I called him back. Fatty looked at me, crossed his arms in front of his chest, and said shyly, "What's up? Did you see my performance today and find that your admiration for me is like a surging river? Are you going to ask me for my autograph, or do you want to hug my thigh?" This guy. I scolded him with a smile and asked Fatty to sit down next to me. Then I said, "Don't talk nonsense. I just want to tell you about the Wang family's restoration of the formation." This was what I had promised Officer Wang yesterday. I should have told Fatty about it, but I came back too late yesterday, and Fatty was already asleep. Today, because of the cooperation between Xuanda Grotto Heaven and San Wang Well Wonderland, I had wasted a lot of time in the arena. That's why I had waited until now. Before I could finish, the fat man jumped up from his chair and shouted, "Officer Wang asked you to ask me for help, right? No, I'm a man of principle. If I say I won't help him, I won't help him." Just as I thought, Fatty didn't like Officer Wang, so it wouldn't be easy to persuade him to help Officer Wang repair the formation. But I wasn't in a hurry. Fatty had a sharp tongue, but he had a soft heart. He didn't have a big grudge against Officer Wang, and it was just because of the way I addressed him. I smiled and said, "Officer Wang didn't ask me to come here to persuade you. I took the initiative and said that you could help me." Fatty couldn't help but put on a pitiful face and said to me, "Third baby, you've changed. You weren't like this before. Have you forgotten the friendship between us? Have you forgotten the promise we made when we were stealing sweet potatoes in the mountains? No matter who was caught by the Lord, we were not to betray the other and we were to protect the other party? How long have you known Officer Wang? What did the two of you do together? You've only known him for less than a year, and you're already speaking up for him. You used to help me. You've changed, third baby." Fatty told me all the things that had happened when we were kids. When he stopped, he looked at me with a pitiful face. I knew his character. The more he acted like this, the more likely it was. Perhaps Officer Wang had informed the Xuanda Grotto Heaven and given me the talismans, which had reduced Fatty's hostility toward him. That was why he said that. As for why he was acting like this, it was because he wanted me to give him a way out of this embarrassing situation. After understanding these things, I felt more confident. I sat up straight and said to him, "Fatty, I'm not asking you to help Officer Wang. I'm asking you to teach them." There was a problem with the formation of Wanwu Grotto Heaven. Wang Can found half a book in the library and gathered all the people who knew how to set up formations in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, but the situation still did not improve. Think about it. You've studied formations systematically in the divination school, And you're a peerless formation genius. You're definitely better than those monks who don't have much experience. If you go there, you'll find a clue at first glance. Then, under your leadership, the Wanwu Grotto Heavens formation will be repaired. At that time, let alone Officer Wang, the entire Wanwu Grotto Heaven will owe you a big favor. What will Officer Wang dare to say when he sees you in the future? At least, he will respect you as much as he respects me. After listening to me, Fatty couldn't help but smile. I looked at him and felt that there was a chance. I was about to continue. However, right at this moment, Fatty opened his eyes and wore a disgusted face. Don't give me that. It's your dog that broke Officer Wang's protective formation. You want to apologize to him, so you asked me to help you. Third brother, you've really changed. When I heard the first two words, I wondered when Fatty had become so principled. However, when I heard the second half of his sentence, I understood. Officer Wang had helped the Fatty today, but the Fatty still had a knot in his heart. Even though I had told him that I had repaired the formation, he still couldn't get over it. That was why he had found an excuse to convince himself that he had helped me. In this way, he could tell me that he wasn't helping the kid from the Wang family, but he was helping him. Chapter 6:22. Not long after I convinced the fat man, dinner was sent over. The fat man didn't feel sleepy after dinner. He said that the Yellow River Formation had used up too much energy and needed to rest. He hurried to the lakeside outside the palace and sat cross-legged to recover his Dao Qi. I had used up a lot of energy fighting Zhao Hao in the arena. If it wasn't for the support of the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet, I would have used up all my energy. Looking at the fat man's anxious look, I planned to go and meditate with him. Although the true dragon qi in Wanwu Grotto was thick, I couldn't feel it in the palace. I didn't know what method they used to convert the true dragon qi into witchcraft energy. So, if I wanted to absorb the true dragon qi to recover my Dao Qi, I had to go to the lakeside like the fat man did. However, just as I reached the door, I recalled the strange voice from the armor-stripping sword that day. Then, I suppressed the thought and returned to the Taoist palace. The reason I was able to obtain victory so quickly today was because of the armor-stripping sword or the voice in the armor-stripping sword. Ever since I got the sword, I did a lot of research on it, but I never heard the voice. Why did it change in the arena today? I took out the armor-removing sword from the Xiang Lu and looked at it for a long time. I didn't find anything strange about the sword. I even injected some of the Dao Qi that I had just recovered into the sword. However, the entire palace was still extremely quiet. Other than the sound of my breathing, there was no other sound. I stopped the transfer of my Dao Qi and true essence, and held it in my hand again. The broken armor-stripping sword did not change at all. The disarming armor sword was still the same disarming armor sword. The blade was rusted, and the body of the sword was almost completely rotten. It looked like it could break in half with a little force. It was exactly the same as when I had first seen it. But after so much time, the sword not only changed my view of the old monster Tsang Feng, but also of him. Just like what Tsang Feng had told me before, this sword could indeed multiply my power and allow me to defeat Zhao Hao. I recalled the scene in the arena. At that time, Zhao Han's petrifying dragon spell was very aggressive and threatened me. As I recovered my true yuan, I channeled my true yuan into the armor-removing sword. However, this still couldn't solve the problem. I had no choice but to take out the Xianyuan sword. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but feel excited. Was that voice awakened by the Xianyuan sword? I thought about it carefully and didn't rule out the possibility. Although I have already mastered the armor-stripping sword for a long time, if one were to look deeper into it, today's battle in the arena was the first time the two of them have met. Although the armor-remover sword was blessed by the heavens and was extraordinary, the Xianyuan sword was the king's sword. Whether it was fame or power, it was above the armor-remover sword. Moreover, the king's sword had some mysterious influence on other swords, which was very likely to happen. I opened my mouth and spat out the Xianyuan sword. I carefully observed the changes between them. The Xianyuan sword was the magic weapon that the Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan, used to conquer the world. It was one of the 10 great divine weapons, and it was incomparably magnificent. The body of the sword was snow-white, as though it carried traces of cold air. Following its appearance, the temperature of the entire Taoist palace seemed to drop. The stem of the sword was a golden cylinder. The cylinder was covered with densely packed protrusions, as though someone had carved inscriptions on it. Even though I had a deep understanding of ancient characters, I still couldn't recognize them. Outside of the inscriptions, there was a divine dragon with 5 claws. On the dragon's body, there were 3 ancient characters, Xianyuan sword. It gave off an austere aura. When I put it next to the broken armor stripping sword, regardless of quality, the difference in appearance was like the difference between heaven and earth. Following the appearance of the Xianyuan sword, the armor stripping sword started to tremble. I seemed to hear a sword hum. It was that sword hum that made me nervous. This sword was obtained from Song Feng, and the voice in the sword was so similar to Song Feng's. Naturally, the identity of this person was self-evident. He was definitely Song Feng's brother, who had helped Song Feng obtain the sword Song Feng and was known as the sword Dao's Gemini. However, he had suddenly disappeared. However, this wasn't the reason why I was nervous. No matter how powerful the background of the voice was, it was still just a voice. After so many years, even Song Feng had become an old man without any cultivation. He had borrowed the power of the sword Song Feng to barely retain a physical body. Moreover, he didn't have a physical body. He had attached himself to the armor-stripping sword and was only able to speak after being stimulated by the Xianyuan sword. What made me nervous was the mighty sword strike that he had used to block the petrifying dragon spell. Thanks to the ancient book that Mo's teacher had left behind, I had also stepped into the doorstep of a sword cultivator. I had also successfully devoured the Xianyuan sword and refined it into my Taoist sword. As long as I patiently nurtured it, I would be able to control the Xianyuan sword like a true sword cultivator in less than a month. Logically speaking, this was a good thing, but it wasn't entirely so. Although the ancient book had made me a sword cultivator, it didn't record the sword technique. The sword technique was the foundation of a sword cultivator's outstanding combat power. In other words, a sword cultivator who only knew how to nurture and use a sword could not be considered a true sword cultivator. Only a sword cultivator who had mastered the sword technique could live up to the name of a sword cultivator and display the true power of a sword cultivator. There was only one way to obtain the sword technique, and that was to obtain it from the Zhao family of the Xuanda Grotto Heaven. However, Mo's teacher had been in the Xuanda Grotto Heaven for a long time and still hadn't obtained it. How could Zhao Hao just give the sword technique away? Therefore, I wanted to try and see if I could obtain the cultivation technique of the Heaven Shocking Sword from the hands of that voice. This wasn't just for my sake, but also for Mo's sake. He had the innate sword embryo, and his cultivation talent in the way of the sword was much stronger than Zhao Hao's. In the future, he would definitely be a cultivator who would condense the yang spirit. If he didn't have the sword technique, then what difference would there be between a yang spirit celestial master who had cultivated the innate sword embryo and a normal sword cultivator? However, it didn't matter if I couldn't obtain it. The armor remodeling sword was still in my hands. From the behavior of that voice, he shouldn't have any ill intentions towards me. If I were to encounter any danger in the future, he would definitely lend a helping hand. As for Mo, there was still a long time before he could mature. This period of time was enough for me to find a suitable sword technique for him to cultivate. As time passed, the sound of the armor remodeling sword became clearer and clearer, and the body of the sword suddenly emitted a green light. The green light became brighter and brighter, and I became nervous. Whether or not I could hear that voice again and obtain the cultivation technique of the sword from him depended on this step. Just as I was thinking, that strange yet familiar voice finally appeared again. However, this time, it didn't appear in my heart, but through my ears. The voice was very anxious and seemed to be a little angry. I only saw the body of the sword shake and the voice was heard. "Evildoer, you still dare to show yourself." Just as the voice finished speaking, a sword aura pierced through the air. "Evildoer? Who's the evildoer?" I was shocked when I heard that. I was the only one in the hall. Could he be referring to me by calling me evildoer? Just as I was guessing, the sword aura shot towards me. As the sword aura got closer and closer to me, I could almost feel the domineering aura from the sword aura. It was different from the sword aura that I would usually use when I used the armor remodeling sword. This sword aura was much more powerful, but it was far from the shocking sword in the arena. Even so, I knew that this sword aura wasn't something that I could withstand with just my physical body. I furrowed my eyebrows and frantically circulated the shaman chi in my body. I used the Heavenly Spirit 9 steps to form a barrier in front of me. Just as the barrier was formed, the sword aura landed on it and pierced through it. It didn't even cause a ripple. It wasn't that the sword aura's power had completely surpassed my cultivation, but that I had used up a lot of my primordial chi after today's battle. The sword aura came too suddenly, and I could only barely gather enough primordial chi to form the barrier. After passing through the barrier, the sword aura landed on the tip of my nose. The sword aura carried a cold air that was like an ice blade. It wreaked havoc in my respiratory tract, as though it was carrying a snowstorm from the extreme north. I instinctively wanted to use the Xian Yuan sword, but because the sword aura suddenly stopped, I sensed that it didn't have much hostility, so I stopped. If the evildoer that he was talking about was really me, and he wanted to kill me now, then why did he help me in the arena? Just as I thought, the sword aura stopped at the tip of my nose and flew past my ear. It didn't land on my body, but shot towards somewhere behind me. I opened my eyes and heard the sound of something heavy landing behind me. I turned around, wanting to see what the evildoer that wanted to kill with the sword aura was, to make Song Feng's brother so angry. But just as I turned around, I was shocked by the pitch-black thing. "Qilin, when did that fellow come in? Was it the evildoer that the armor remodeling sword was talking about?" Noticing that I was looking at it, the Qilin sat up and glanced at me. It revealed the sword aura in its mouth. It moved its mouth and swallowed the sword aura. Sword aura could be eaten? It was obvious that the armor remodeling sword had also noticed the Qilin. It turned into a ray of light and circled around the Qilin. It exclaimed in surprise, "Qilin? Is this the holy beast Qilin? There are holy beasts in this world? The Xian Yuan divine sword, the Qilin divine beast. Brat, what is your identity? Why do you have these things?" I didn't know what the armor remodeling sword's sword aura meant, but it was obvious that the appearance of the Qilin had disrupted its train of thought. In its shock, its attention was completely attracted by the Qilin. I lightly coughed and bowed towards the armor remodeling sword. "Senior is overpraising me. I'm just an ordinary person. I still have to thank Senior for your help today. As for the Xian Yuan sword and the Qilin, it was just a coincidence that someone else gave them to me." What I said wasn't wrong. The Xian Yuan sword was given to me by Nan Gong. Even though I didn't know what his motive was, it shouldn't be to harm me. As for the Qilin, the old Gu woman from Miao Jiang planted it in my body. Even though her motive was to kill me, it was resolved by the puppet from Qi Yu's tomb. It became my pet. Even though it didn't listen to me, it was no different from giving it to me. The armor remodeling sword obviously didn't believe my words, but it didn't care about me. It swayed and floated behind the Qilin. After looking around, it asked in surprise, "Where's the evildoer? Why did he disappear?" "Evildoer? Hearing that word again, I was puzzled. I originally thought that it was referring to me. However, I had been standing there without moving, yet it had gone around me. It was obvious that it wasn't referring to me. However, I was the only one in the room. If it wasn't referring to me, then who was it referring to? Chapter 6:23. Just as I was feeling puzzled, the voice from the armor-stripping sword sounded out again. He had some doubts as he asked me, "That's not right. Just now I really felt that evildoer's aura. Why has it disappeared? Could it be that there's a problem with the bottle?" Bottle? I looked at the armor-stripping sword again. At that moment it was circling around a green and red ancient pine vase. This vase was the one that the fatty and I had experimented with when we first entered the Taoist palace. At that time, in order to prove to the fatty that it was a magic tool, I injected a lot of qi into it. In the end, I obtained an unknown seed from the vase. It was also because of that seed that I managed to exchange for this armor-stripping sword from Tsang Feng on the eve of the Heavenly Grand Ritual. When I obtained the seed, I did indeed see the shadow of a woman. But after that, no matter how much qi I injected into the vase was like a dead object and didn't have any reaction. Could it be that the evildoer that he was talking about was the woman that had appeared in the vase? As I pondered, I asked, "The evildoer that Senior is talking about, is it a woman?" Hearing my words, the armor-stripping sword suddenly became spirited. The sword flashed with a clear light and landed in front of me. "You've seen her before?" Seeing his reaction, I naturally had an answer in my heart. The nervousness in my heart gradually calmed down. Thinking about it, this was the center of Wangu Paradise. Even though Wangu Paradise's protective formation had been broken by the Qilin, it was just like what the fatty had said. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The reason why Wangu Paradise was able to sit at the top of the paradise for dozens of years wasn't just because of their protective formation. If the armor-stripping sword wanted to make a move, he would have to think twice. After understanding this, I told the armor-stripping sword about the vase. Junior accidentally obtained this vase. At that time, I felt that the vase wasn't an ordinary item, so I kept it with me. Afterwards, I investigated it many times but couldn't find any mysteries behind it, so I temporarily put it aside. Later on, Junior was cultivating when I suddenly felt that there seemed to be someone peeping out of the vase. After investigating for a long time, I coincidentally found the figure of a woman behind the ancient pine. However, it was only that one time. After that, no matter how we observed, she never appeared again. After saying that, I originally intended to tell him about the deal between me and Tsang Feng, but after thinking for a while, I didn't say it. He had learned from Officer Wang that Tsang Feng had a dispute with his elder brother because of a woman, and in the end, they fought. Since then, Tsang Feng had turned into the appearance of a child, and there was no news of his elder brother. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, and no one had ever seen him again. If the voice in the armor-piercing sword was really Tsang Feng's brother, and he was able to discover the woman hiding in the bottle at the first moment, then judging from his tone, this woman was most likely the culprit who had caused the two brothers to fall out. If he were to find out that his brother had offered him up in exchange for information about this woman, their relationship would probably become even more strained. Moreover, the information that I used to exchange for his information wasn't real. If it was seen through, my situation would only become more awkward. The armor-piercing sword listened to me and hovered in the air for a while. Then, it muttered in a low voice, "Woman." After a long moment of silence, it suddenly moved away from the woman and asked me, "Then, how did you get me?" I was stunned. Tsang Feng's brother was really touching my sore spot originally. I had concealed the fact that I had gotten it to protect their relationship. However, I didn't know how to answer his question. I couldn't say that I had picked it up, and it was even worse to say that Tsang Feng had given it to me. Tsang Feng had disappeared after he had a dispute with Tsang Feng. It was normal for other people to say that they didn't know that he was attached to the armor-piercing sword. However, if I said that Song Feng didn't know, I wouldn't believe it either. As the last person who had come into contact with the armor-piercing sword, how could Song Feng not know that his elder brother was attached to the sword? I thought about how to answer the question of the armor-piercing sword. The more I thought about it, the stranger I felt. If Song Feng knew that his elder brother was attached to the armor-piercing sword, why did he still give it to me? Just as I was thinking about how to answer, an old voice came from outside the Taoist palace. I instantly recognized the owner of the voice. It was the little old man, Song Feng. He looked like a child, but his voice was extremely old. It was very similar to the voice in the armor-piercing sword. I gave it to him. If you have any questions, come and ask me. Following the voice, Song Feng's small figure stepped through the door of the Taoist palace. Huang Fuxiu followed closely behind him, as well as Wang Can. From the moment I used that move on the arena, Song Feng's gaze towards me became heated. It was obvious that he had something to say to me. I had originally thought that after today's battle, he would find me to discuss the matter of that sword. However, I hadn't expected that he would wait until now. After all, it was related to his and the armor-piercing sword's privacy. It wasn't convenient to discuss it in public, so it was better to discuss it in private. After all, it wasn't a good thing for brothers to fight each other. The rumors about the two of them weren't good either. Coincidentally, the voice in the armor-piercing sword had appeared again when he came over. It could be considered a coincidence. The armor-piercing sword obviously hadn't expected Song Feng to suddenly appear. He was silent for a while before he suddenly let out a long breath. He said to Song Feng, "Since you gave it to me, it's not strange. You were the last person I saw that year. That place wasn't a place that just anyone could enter. In the end, you used Song Feng to transform into a child and avoided the disaster. Since you survived, you naturally have to bring me out." As the armor-piercing sword spoke, it slowly floated towards the door. After entering the door, Song Feng didn't stop and walked straight forward. Only when there was only a step between them did both of them stop at the same time. Neither of them took another step forward, and neither of them spoke another word. One man and one sword faced each other just like that, and the air was instantly suffused with a sense of mutual hostility. From their conversation, it seemed that the two of them had experienced something that outsiders didn't know about. However, it was obvious that the rumors were true. The relationship between the two brothers wasn't that good. Huang Fuxiu, who was behind Song Feng, seemed to know the secret. She didn't follow Song Feng but walked towards me with Officer Wang, standing next to me. Looking at the situation of the two, Officer Wang lowered his voice and whispered in my ear, "Senior Song Feng said that he wanted to talk to you about something. So, I brought them here." The relationship between Bao Xian Wonderland and Wanwu Wonderland wasn't bad. Song Feng wanted to find me, but he couldn't find my residence. Naturally, he had to ask for Officer Wang's help. I didn't think it was strange. I nodded to show that I understood. I didn't answer, but my eyes were fixed on Song Feng. After Officer Wang said that, his eyes turned to Song Feng and Huang Fuxiu. Huang Fuxiu's eyes were fixed on Song Feng. She held her breath and watched the two of them. No one spoke in the Taoist palace. The atmosphere was terrifyingly quiet. After a while, Song Feng broke the deadlock. He sighed and put his hands behind his back to avoid the armor-piercing sword in front of him. He sighed and said, "After so many years, you don't even have a physical body anymore. Why are you still as stubborn as before?" The armor-piercing sword spun in the air and pointed at the bottle with its tip. He replied angrily, "You're the same. After so many years, you've become like a ghost, but you're still as impulsive as before." Song Feng waved his hand. "No, no, no. I've changed. I've been different for a long time. If it were me back then, I would have rushed to you when I saw you in the arena. But I've waited until now. I'm different from back then. After that, Song Feng didn't wait for Song Feng to reply. He turned his back to his twin brother and said with a sad tone, "Sometimes, when I see these young people, I wonder what we were fighting for back then. Whether it's the emotionless swordsmanship or the emotionless swordsmanship, it's not enough to control the swords. We fought for so many years over who was stronger and who was weaker. What did we get in the end? We lost our physical bodies and became the sword spirits of the two swords." Song Feng obviously didn't expect Song Feng to say that. The sword paused in the air. After a long silence, the old voice came again. "Actually, I've thought it through. A long time ago, when the armor-piercing sword pierced your body, I figured it out. We cultivate the sword, but in the end, we're controlled by the sword's will. What's the point of that?" The voice in the armor-piercing sword was also tinged with sadness. Although I didn't know what happened back then, I vaguely understood that the two of them were a little regretful at the moment. And what really caused the two brothers to fall out back then wasn't just the woman, but also the swordsmanship they cultivated. At this point, the two of them calmed down. There was no longer any tension in the air. The two old voices, like old friends of many years, talked about what happened back then. As they talked, I gradually understood what had happened between them. Back then, after obtaining the two swords, Song Feng and Song Feng, in Kunlun Mountain, the two brothers became obsessed with the swordsmanship. They each comprehended different sword technique. According to the inscriptions on the swords, Song Feng cultivated the emotionless swordsmanship, while Song Feng cultivated the opposite, the emotionless swordsmanship. Although the outside world called the two the swordsmanship twins, as they continued to be obsessed with the swordsmanship, the conflict between them grew. They even saw each other as mortal enemies. After countless conflicts, they finally broke out in a big battle. It ended with Song Feng winning. And the woman in the bottle seemed to be the symbol of their conflict. But after I heard it, I still had many doubts. Chapter 6:24. Song Feng and Disarm were called the twin swordsmen by the blessed enclave when they were young. Their cultivation must have been no weaker than Wang Can and I. To be able to cultivate to the heavenly master level meant that one's intelligence and temperament were the cream of the crop. Plus, they were blood brothers. To kill each other just because they were fighting over who was stronger. It sounded unbelievable. Let's not talk about the fight between the two brothers for now. Let's talk about the woman in the vase. In order to obtain information about her, Song Feng had used the Disarm sword in exchange. Disarm had discovered the woman the moment he appeared and called her a demon, wanting nothing more than to kill her with his sword. This woman must have had a deep relationship with the Song Feng and Disarm brothers. Just as I was thinking, Song Feng and Disarm seemed to have let go of their many years of grudges. Song Feng stared at the Disarm sword. He was no longer in a direct confrontation. His eyes were filled with sorrow and regret. Song Feng's gaze was heavy, but the Disarm sword's movements were light. It waved its sword in the air and changed the topic from the past. "Guess what I found here?" Song Feng moved his feet and dodged the sword flower. The heaviness in his eyes dissipated slightly as he replied. "What?" The Disarm sword didn't answer. It floated a few steps forward and turned its tip to point at Qilin, who was snoozing nearby. Song Feng followed the direction pointed by the tip of the sword and glanced at the Qilin that was about the same height as him. He said lightly, "Qilin, yesterday in the arena this strange beast shocked everyone. Why are you pointing this Qilin to me?" His tone was suspicious, but he realized something was wrong before the Disarm sword could respond. He moved his gaze from Qilin to the vase on the ground. "This is Gu Yanran's aura?" Song Feng's murky eyes widened. Gu Yanran? That was the name of the woman in the vase? The name sounded nice, and it didn't sound like the demon that the Disarm sword had called her. While I was curious about the woman in the vase, I couldn't help but feel awkward. When Song Feng saw the vase and thought about it, he would realize how much I had lied to him. Even though I wasn't familiar with Song Feng at the time and it was unintentional, I still lied to him. I didn't know if he would take his anger out on me when he realized it. Temporarily putting aside the awkwardness in my heart, I lifted my eyes and continued to watch. Because it was the body of the sword that he sensed the bottle, or rather, the woman in the bottle, he only shouted "demon" and sent out a stream of sword energy. But I couldn't see his expression, so I couldn't feel his emotions. However, Song Feng was different. He was a real person, and his attitude towards Gu Yanran was completely revealed on his face. His eyes widened and the veins on his forehead bulged. After receiving confirmation that the armor had been removed, his entire body burned with rage. In his deepest, most hateful voice he said, "So you were hiding here. Gu Yanran, it's been so many years. You've made it so hard for me to find you." After saying that, he panted heavily and stared fiercely at the vase. A ferocious expression hung on that childish face, making it look rather strange. No matter how long he stared at it, the vase was like a dead object. Under his fierce gaze, it didn't move at all. After a while, Song Feng turned to look at the sword with a burning gaze. He asked, "Can you break the seal on it and pull her out of the vase?" Because Zai Jia had discovered this in advance, he was much calmer now. He turned his sword and told her about how he had discovered Gu Yanran and was about to attack with his sword aura, but Qilin had suddenly appeared and swallowed his sword aura. "Qilin," Song Feng muttered. He looked at the Qilin with hostility. It was obvious he hated the Qilin as well. Even though the Qilin had swallowed the sword energy from the armor, I knew that the Qilin had nothing to do with the vase or the woman in it. It had already been in the palace for 2 days. During this time, the vase had been there the entire time, but the Qilin hadn't expressed any interest. It had swallowed the sword energy earlier because the sword energy's trajectory had coincidentally moved towards the Qilin's body. I was worried that Song Feng would fight the Qilin. Before they could do anything, I quickly walked over and shouted, "Seniors, the Qilin has nothing to do with the vase. Also, its cultivation is not low. Please don't fight it." Hearing my words, Song Feng turned to look at me. After frowning slightly, he pointed at the Qilin and signaled for me to take the Qilin away. Seeing that he believed me, I heaved a sigh of relief. However, when I turned to look at the Qilin, I also frowned. Even though the Qilin was born from me, it didn't listen to me. It was obvious that I couldn't take the Qilin away by myself. Helpless, I could only call Tong Tong out and have her take the Qilin away. Tong Tong was a natural child. In the mortal world she could cause a lot of fights. However, in the blessed enclave she wasn't considered precious. If she hadn't unexpectedly obtained the power of lightning, she wouldn't be much different from a normal spirit in the eyes of the people of the blessed enclave. The people present were all people who knew me very well. After the pupil appeared, they only glanced at it before shifting their gazes away. Compared to the spirit snake and the Qilin, the most outstanding thing about Tong Tong was that she was considerate. Moreover, she had a high EQ and knew how to read people's expressions. Thus, when she came out and found that the situation in the Taoist palace wasn't right, she didn't say anything. She obediently followed my instructions and went to the Qilin. She whispered in his ear for a while before bringing him to my side. Then, she returned to the jade bracelet. Without the Qilin's obstruction, the two brothers didn't stand on ceremony anymore. The Song Feng's body flashed with a blue light, and a strong sword energy shot out. This sword energy was different from the one I'd felt before. It was almost comparable to the sword attack I'd used in the arena. How powerful is the vase's restriction spell? Why does it need so much effort? With this thought in mind, I glanced at Officer Wang. Although I'd told Song Feng that the vase had a great relationship with me, it was only because I lived here and accidentally found it. So, only the owner of this place, Officer Wang, knew how powerful it was. Officer Wang obviously didn't know that the restriction spell on the vase was so powerful. He just stared at the sword energy of the Tsang Feng and didn't even notice me looking at him. Since it was launched at a close distance, the sword energy fell on the vase in the blink of an eye. Then, something even stranger happened. Under the full attack of the Tsang Feng's sword, the white porcelain vase only emitted a strong light, as if it had absorbed the sword energy. As the strong light dispersed, the vase was revealed. Officer Wang didn't know how powerful the full attack of the Tsang Feng's sword energy was because he hadn't seen my performance in the arena. But judging from the aura of the sword energy, he should be able to guess what it was. Tsang Feng, Huang Fuxiu, and I had seen it with our own eyes, especially me. That sword had absorbed all of my Taoist qi and true essence, so I knew how powerful it was. Even Zhao Han, who had sacrificed his blood and lifespan to launch a full attack, was no match for it. But how could such a powerful attack have no effect on the fragile porcelain vase? I'd observed the vase many times, but I hadn't found anything unusual. Could it be that the woman named Gu Yanran had withstood the attack inside the vase? Officer Wang and I found it strange, but Tsang Feng seemed to have expected it. He and his sword began to attack the small vase again. Even Huang Fuxiu looked calm, as if she had expected this result. He looked at me and Officer Wang in surprise and explained to us, "I don't know the origin of this porcelain vase, but Tsang Feng's granduncle told me that they found this vase next to the Tsang Feng and Tsang Feng swords. It seems to be a natural treasure." Natural treasure? What about the woman in the vase? Is she also a natural treasure? Is she not a human but the spirit of the vase? Artifact spirits were miraculous. With the help of an artifact spirit, an ordinary Dharma artifact's power would increase by more than several times. That was why I'd been so excited when I'd found the snake spirit and the old compass in the old shop. Innate treasures nurtured by the heavens were already extremely powerful, so how powerful would an innate treasure nurtured by the heavens with a weapon spirit be? Or, how powerful would the spirit be? No wonder even Tsang Feng's full power attack couldn't break the vase. Huang Fuxiu seemed to know what I was thinking. He nodded at me and said, "The woman named Gu Yanran in the vase is the spirit of the vase. When the two of them got the Tsang Feng and Tsang Feng swords, they found this thing not far from the swords. At that time, Gu Yanran's power was very weak, but she was the spirit of a natural treasure, an old monster that had lived for thousands of years. Don't you mortals always say that having an old person at home is like having a treasure? That's what our mystic grotto heaven thought, too. To avoid causing a commotion among the other grotto heavens, my elders suppressed the matter. The entire mystic grotto heaven treated the vase and Gu Yanran as treasures and worshipped them day and night. One day, Gu Yanran suddenly showed up and asked us to cultivate. Our elders were very happy. Back then, the mystic grotto heaven was just a small paradise. What it lacked the most was a knowledgeable elder to teach us how to cultivate. Although Gu Yanran is only an artifact spirit, she is still an old demon who has lived for thousands of years. Anything she says will be greatly beneficial to our cultivation. Immediately, the elders of the mystic grotto heaven reached an agreement with her. As long as she could teach the disciples of the grotto heaven how to cultivate, we would fulfill all her requests. In the beginning, Gu Yanran did a good job. She didn't ask for anything. She only focused on teaching the disciples of the mystic grotto heaven. In a short time, our grotto heaven's power increased several times. We climbed from the paradise to the 36 minor grotto heavens, and we even climbed to the top 10 grotto heavens. My father and the elders of that generation were very happy. With that kind of momentum, it wasn't impossible for her to become the leader in the future. Huang Fuxiu didn't hide her words from Officer Wang, who was standing next to me. She sounded like she was looking forward to the future. However, her expression quickly disappeared, and was replaced by annoyance and regret. Chapter 6:25. From the first half of Huang Fuxiu's words, Gu Yanran and the porcelain vase were indeed rare treasures to be able to guide the people of the treasure mysterious paradise without asking for anything in return. Although a naturally nurtured Dharma artifact was important, the treasure Xian Grotto's heritage was weak at that time. With Gu Yanran in charge, the treasure Xian Grotto was no different from having an experienced ancestor. It would allow all the cultivators in the treasure Xian Grotto to avoid many detours on their path of cultivation. However, there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. If Gu Yanran was able to do that, what she was plotting must not be simple. I originally thought that the story between two men and a woman would be nothing more than love. Even if it wasn't about that, there would still be some flirtatious element. I never thought that it would be a matter of heritage. Huang Fuxiu paused at the turning point. Tears even welled up in his eyes. He took a deep breath to compose himself before continuing. It was another heavenly grand ritual. With Gu Yanran's help, our profound grotto heaven is one step closer to the throne of the top. But at that moment, Gu Yanran suddenly gathered all the heavenly adept realm cultivators in our grotto heaven. At the time, the treasure mysterious paradise had just achieved good results in the all-heaven competition. Everyone was in a good mood, and with Gu Yanran's urging, the seniors of the treasure mysterious paradise gathered together. They all guessed that Gu Yanran was going to teach them some secret cultivation technique. But that wasn't the case. After Gu Yanran gathered all the elders, she didn't say much. She just activated the array she set up and used the power of the array to suck all of them dry. Huang Fuxiu clenched her fists tightly as she spoke. Boundless rage surged from her eyes as she glared at the vase in the distance. It was as if she wanted to swallow someone whole. But in the end, he resisted the urge. After a long sigh, he said in a hoarse voice, "This Gu Yanran never had any good intentions for us. The only reason she helped us so much was because she wanted to escape from the bottle and needed the blood of hundreds of heavenly masters to set up a formation. That's why she taught us how to cultivate. We shouldn't have trusted someone of unknown origins so easily, but the mystical cave had been weak for many years. We saw a glimmer of hope and had no choice but to grab it with all our might." As she spoke, the anger on Huang Fuxiu's face gradually disappeared, replaced by sorrow. Officer Wang patted him on the shoulder and opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Beside her, I also sighed. Gu Yanran, the artifact spirit, was too shrewd. For his own needs, he did not hesitate to sacrifice the lives of over 100 people. I don't know what human life means to artifact spirits, but from a human's point of view, Gu Yanran's methods are too bloody. No wonder Cang Feng was willing to sacrifice Duan Jia's sword just to get some information about her. No wonder Duan Jia couldn't help but want to kill her as soon as he discovered her aura. There was no romance between them, as the outside world had imagined. There was only a scarlet red that was paved with lives. At that moment, Cang Feng and Duan Jia were like mad demons. Their sword auras kept bursting out. Every strike looked powerful, but it was ineffective. Without exception, they were all swallowed by the strong light emitted by the porcelain bottle. Although hatred could incite anger, it was obvious that the two of them, who were bursting with anger, had no way of breaking the light screen of the bottle. Their frenzied attacks were just a way to vent their emotions. While the two of them were venting their emotions to their heart's content, Huang Fuxiu had already collected her emotions. She looked up at the battle between Cang Feng and Zhang Feng. Continuing her earlier words, she continued, "Originally, after Gu Yanran devoured more than 100 people from the mystic grotto heaven, she could have completely recovered her strength. Fortunately, someone discovered her scheme in advance. At the last critical moment, they sacrificed their lives to destroy the array formation she had set up, causing Gu Yanran's 100 years of planning to go down the drain. However, the seniors who were trapped in the formation still couldn't be saved. All of them lost their lives in Gu Yenran's formation. As for Gu Yenran, she was only severely injured and had to escape. So, after Grand Uncle Tsang Feng returned, the mystical cave put down everything and began to search the entire world. We swore to find her and destroy her soul. Huang Fu Xiu's current emotions were probably the same as when I saw Lu Zhenyang. She wanted to eat his flesh raw. Just as I was thinking about how to comfort Huang Fu Xiu, I heard the Qilin snorting. I turned to look. I didn't know what was wrong with him, but he suddenly stood up from the ground. He raised his head and his hooves stirred up the wind. He lifted his feet and flew in the direction of the porcelain bottle. "What are you doing? Come back!" I frowned and hurriedly called out to stop him. Although the Qilin was miraculous and could break formations and eat sword energy, he was just a beast. He didn't have a high intellect, so he couldn't understand Huang Fu Xiu's story. He didn't know that this had become the mystical cave's family business, and outsiders couldn't interfere. All we could do was watch them handle it and keep quiet. Although I didn't know what the Qilin was thinking, considering how he had swallowed the sword energy, he couldn't do anything good this time. That was why I couldn't help but call out to stop him. I hoped the Qilin wouldn't disturb them. However, the Qilin was the same as before. When he heard my voice, he didn't turn around. He even moved his head and sped up, flying toward the porcelain bottle. I wanted to stop him, but it was too late. At that moment, the Qilin had already landed in front of the porcelain bottle. The sword energy from unload armor and sheath edge whistled. My heart was in my throat. Of course, I wasn't worried about the Qilin. He was really strong, and from his previous performance, the sword energy couldn't hurt him. What I was worried about was what would happen if sheath edge armor discovered that the Qilin had stopped him from taking revenge. Sheath edge armor hated Gu Yenran more than anyone else in the mystical cave. After all, they were the ones who had brought Gu Yenran back to the mystical cave. It was also because of what they had done that had led to the tragedy of the mystical cave. Such a strong hatred that had been accumulated for hundreds of years had finally found a way to vent, but someone had stopped him. I didn't need to think to know what they could do. Their hatred would definitely be transferred to the person who had stopped them. They would soon realize that they weren't the Qilin's opponent. Who would they think of then? It had to be me because I was his master. Their anger will all be directed at me. Although they wouldn't be able to defeat the Qilin and the others, they would definitely win against me. With that thought, I couldn't help but take a few steps forward. I didn't care about the fact that my power was far from the Qilin's. I wanted to rush over and carry him back. However, just as I took a few steps, the Qilin moved. He didn't care about sheath edge armor, who was trying to attack him. Instead, he moved his head and used the horn on his head to stab at the porcelain bottle. I instantly stopped. What is the Qilin doing? Could it be that he wasn't here to fight sheath edge armor, but to help them deal with the vase? Very quickly, the Qilin confirmed my guess. As the horn got closer and closer to the porcelain bottle once again released a strong light. However, this time, it was different from the previous times. The strong light that could devour and absorb the sword chi of the deconstructing sword did not even have the slightest bit of power in front of the Qilin's horn. It was like an eggshell. The moment the two came into contact, a cracking sound came from within the strong light. Finally, as the Qilin's horn stabbed in, the strong light shattered into countless pieces and scattered everywhere. In the end, it disappeared. All of this happened very quickly. After the Qilin got up and broke the formation, sheath edge armor released another sword energy. We only felt that the strong light on the vase shook slightly before it disappeared. Right after that, the sword energy continued to move forward and fell on the white porcelain bottle. Without the protection of the strong light, the porcelain bottle didn't look strange anymore. When it met the sword energy directly, It didn't have any power to resist. Right after that, there was a cracking sound. Wang Can, Huang Fuxiu, Hidden Edge Armor, and I had all seen the Qilin break the formation on the Heavenly Grand Rituals stage. In a sense, the light screen on the vase was also a kind of formation. Seeing the Qilin break the formation again, our expressions didn't look any better. The strong light that hadn't moved in front of Sheath Edge Armor had been broken by the Qilin's horn with just a gentle touch. It was too magical. As for Sheath Edge Armor, I had never seen the Qilin's ability before. At that moment the sword shivered. After a while, I couldn't help but sigh. The Qilin Divine Beast is really magical. Gu Yanran's formation has a strong defense, but it can't even resist the Qilin. Just as everyone was sighing, a sudden change occurred. A whirlwind suddenly rose from the shattered pieces of porcelain on the ground. The whirlwind was powerful, and as soon as it appeared, it swept through the entire hall of the Taoist palace. The pressure from the whirlwind was so strong that I almost couldn't breathe. In the whirlwind, I heard a woman's voice. "It's you two brats again. Isn't it enough that you've lost your bodies? Do you still want to go against me?" The voice was crisp like a young girl's. However, I quickly realized that it was Gu Yanran's voice in the vase. I squinted and looked at the center of the whirlwind. At that moment, Sheath Edge Armor was flying in the whirlwind and spinning. The blade emitted a green light and released several sword energies to protect Hidden Edge Armor behind it. Sheath Edge Armor didn't say anything, but Hidden Edge Armor's voice was like thunder in the wind. "Gu Yanran, we've been looking for you for so many years. Do you think that we don't have a way to deal with you?" Chapter 626. The bottle was crystal clear, as if it was carved out of jade. The bottle wasn't big, and it looked about the same size as the vase Gu Yanran was hiding in. After Tsang Feng took out the bottle, he didn't do anything else, but the speed of the whirlwinds around him suddenly slowed down. I exhaled softly. The Mystic Paradise had been searching for Gu Yanran for so many years, so they were naturally prepared for her trick. Back then, Tsang Feng had used the sheathed edge sword to transform into a physical body, and he had lost all his cultivation. However, he was still fearless in Gu Yanran's whirlwinds. Apart from his brother's armor removal, the only other possibility was this jade bottle. Gu Yanran seemed to have noticed the difference in the jade bottle. She began to gather the whirlwinds and gathered the blades of wind within a 3-foot radius around her. At that moment, I could finally see Gu Yanran's figure clearly. On the outside, she looked like a weak woman. She floated there like a puff of smoke, as if the whirlwind around her would tear her to pieces if it was just a little bit more violent. However, her tone was not weak at all. She looked in the direction of Tsang Feng's armor removal, and an arm grew out of her smoke-like body. She pointed at Tsang Feng and said, "The two brats of the Mystic Paradise have Yang spirit cultivation now. If it wasn't for my guidance, how could the two of you have your current cultivation? It's fine if you don't know how to be grateful, but you dare to attack me? You really don't know what's good for you." This time, Tsang Feng didn't reply. Instead, the armor removal sword moved. It swung its blade and released an attack. He said coldly, "There's no point in talking anymore. Gu Yanran, pay for the deaths of our Mystic Paradise's people." As he spoke, he didn't wait for Gu Yanran to reply. The armor removal sword flashed and attacked Gu Yanran, who was hiding in the whirlwinds. Armor removal's attack this time was different from all the other times I'd seen it. Previously, he'd been a few meters away and used sword energy to defend himself. However, this time, he was using the body of the sword. Without anyone controlling it, he was using the body of the sword to fight Gu Yanran. I've seen artifact spirits before. The snake spirit hiding on my back used to be an artifact spirit, but compared to Gu Yanran and Duan Jia, even the snake spirit today after transforming into a Jiao was no match for them, let alone the snake spirit from back then. Gu Yanran stopped talking when she saw Stripper suddenly launch an attack. The smoke-like figure flashed in the whirlwind, and the gathered whirlwind attacked again. It was different from the whirlwind that filled the hall earlier. Under Gu Yenran's careful control, this whirlwind was greenish-black in color. It spiraled forward like a greenish-black rope. Although it was much smaller in size, it contained a majestic aura, and its power did not decrease at all. Faced with Gu Yenran's counterattack, stripping armor slowed down a bit. Gu Yenran didn't know what secret technique he used, but every time he moved forward, a sword aura would appear beside him. Some of the sword chi were like ice, bone-chilling cold, and some were like fire, scorching hot. However, every single sword chi had a common point, and that was their sharpness. Even if Mount Tai was in front of him, he would be able to break it with a single slash of his sword. This was a duel between two artifact spirits, and there could only be two outcomes. One was for stripping armor to win, and avenge Baoxian Grotto Heaven for being tricked by Zhao Yanran. This was the best outcome. The other outcome was for stripping armor to lose, and Gu Yanran would use her overwhelming power to crush stripping armor. After that, her artifact body would be broken in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, and thousands of years of cultivation would be destroyed. Naturally, she would vent her anger in Wanwu Grotto Heaven. At that time, she would definitely not let me off as I watched the battle from the sidelines. Perhaps my life wouldn't be in danger with Tong and Qilin around, but the feeling of my life being in someone else's hands made me very uncomfortable. Thinking of that, I gripped the Xianyuan sword in my hand, ready to attack at any time. Seeing my actions, Wang Kanxian summoned her seal as well, ready to fight at any time. Huang Fuxiu, who was at the side, was naturally ready to join the battle at any time. Gu Yenran's wind rope and stripping armor's sword chi were getting closer and closer, and finally collided. The frost-covered sword chi was the first to bear the brunt of the impact of the wind rope, and in the next second, it was scattered by the rampaging wind. After that, it was the fire-like sword chi, but it still didn't have a good ending, and was scattered one by one. None of the sword chi was a match for the wind, and all of them were scattered and dissipated in the wind. Every time a sword chi was scattered by the wind, stripping armor would form another one. However, the speed at which it formed was far slower than the speed at which it was scattered by the wind. In less than 10 breaths, the last sword chi was scattered, and the wind landed on stripping armor's broken blade without any resistance, and made a crisp sound. In the next second, stripping armor's sword flew backward, and fell to the ground far away. Now's the time. I took advantage of the opportunity, and crazily infused my primordial shaman chi into the Xianyuan sword. Then, I stepped forward with my right foot, and used the 9 heavenly steps in one go. With all the primordial chi in my body, I used the 9 heavenly steps on the Xianyuan sword's beautiful blade, and slashed at the greenish-black wind rope. This was the strongest attack I could use at the moment, but it didn't have any effect. After the wind rope was pushed back, it seemed to have used up its moves and didn't dodge my attack. However, the effect of my sword was only to cause the wind rope's trajectory to change slightly. Shortly after, the wind rope returned to its original path. Wang Kan and Huang Fuxiu's attacks followed after me. However, my attack had the advantage of a sneak attack, while the two of them were weaker. Not only did they not gain any advantage, but they were also repelled by the wind rope, and both of them spat blood. Gu Yanran looked at the three of us and sneered. Then, she said, "You juniors, don't worry. Wait until I'm done with those 2 kids, then I'll deal with you." Then, she didn't care about us anymore. The wind rope fluttered and flew towards the faraway Tsangfeng. Even stripping armor was no match for her, let alone Tsangfeng who had lost his cultivation. If Gu Yanran wanted to deal with him, it wouldn't take more than a few seconds. Thinking about this, I gritted my teeth and poured all the true essence in my body into the Xianyuan sword. I prepared to stand up and stop Gu Yanran. But before I could do anything, Tsangfeng stood up to face Gu Yanran. He didn't care about the wind rope that was about to land on his chest. He formed a seal with both hands and pointed the mouth of the pristine jade bottle at Gu Yenran. He sneered, "Gu Yenran, aren't you a bit too arrogant? Look at what Grandpa is holding." Then, he pushed his hands forward. Endless yin and yang qi swam out of the small jade bottle like two fish and attached to the dark green wind rope. Like lightning, it spun and chased after Gu Yenran. Seeing the yin and yang qi, Gu Yenran looked like she was struck by lightning. Her smoke-like figure kept flashing, and she wanted to cut off the connection between herself and the wind rope. However, the yin and yang qi was something Song Feng had prepared for many years. How could it be so easy to deal with? Like maggots on a bone, they followed the wind rope and instantly landed on Gu Yenran's body. They kept swallowing the whirlwind around her, and even her smoke-like figure. After being possessed by the yin and yang qi, Gu Yenran was clearly uncomfortable. She twisted her body, trying to break free from the yin and yang qi's control. She screamed coldly, "Yin yang qi bottle? You actually found the yin yang qi bottle? Little bastard, after I escape from this bottle, I'll make you die a horrible death." Song Feng looked at Gu Yenran and didn't care about her harsh words at all. Instead, he smiled and replied coolly, "Of course this is the yin-yang twin bottle. Back then, after I returned to the profound paradise and learned that you killed my people, I carefully prepared this for you. The yin-yang twin bottle contains the yin-yang twin bottle and is the bane of all spiritual beings. Also, it won't kill you immediately. Instead, it will use the yin-yang twin bottle to gradually wear you down. The stronger you are, the longer it will wear you down. I made a rough calculation. Gu Yenran, for a spiritual item of your level, it shouldn't be too long to stay in the bottle for 500 years, right?" As time passed, Gu Yenran's previous arrogance was gone. She became more and more impatient in Song Feng's voice, and her curses became more and more unpleasant. She didn't look like a spirit that had lived for thousands of years. Instead, she looked like a shrew that had lived on the streets for thousands of years. Towards the end, she seemed to realize that her endless curses couldn't escape from the yin-yang qi bottle in Song Feng's hand. She turned to look at me, Wang Can, and Huang Fuxiu. She begged us and promised that if anyone could save her from Song Feng's hands, she would recognize him as her master and do her best to guide his cultivation. Of course, I didn't believe her, but I was slightly moved. Ever since I had obtained the death scripture from Lao Ai, I had embarked on the path of cultivation. However, the death scripture contains almost all earthly adept Dao technique. As my cultivation gets higher and higher, the death scripture becomes less and less useful to me. Now, it's practically useless. Therefore, during this period of time, I have been studying the sword cultivation method. However, compared to the techniques recorded in the death scripture, my current sword cultivation techniques couldn't display much power, even with the help of the Xianyuan sword. If I wanted to go further on the path of cultivation, the most important thing now was to find the next suitable cultivation technique and Taoist technique. The Taoist techniques recorded in the death scripture were extraordinary. Logically speaking, they shouldn't only be earthly master technique. They should involve techniques of a higher realm. However, I had flipped through the cloth countless times but couldn't find anything. Only then did I give up. Since I couldn't find the answer in the death scripture, I could only look for other cultivation technique. Gu Yenran was a spirit that had lived for thousands of years. With her knowledge, she could definitely help me a lot. Of course, I only thought about it. Based on Gu Yenran's behavior, if I was really persuaded by her, even if I could save her from Song Feng's hands, it would only be the next story of the farmer and the snake. Although I urgently need the next cultivation technique, I will not do something like playing with fire and burning myself. Chapter 6:27. After everything quieted down, Song Feng looked at the jade bottle and confirmed that Gu Yenran wouldn't be able to fight back. Then, he put the jade bottle away. Then, He walked to the armor remover sword and picked it up. He held it in his hand and looked at it. The armor remover sword was silent. Gu Yanran's attack had been too powerful, and the sword had taken a direct hit. Obviously, it had fainted again. Song Feng looked at it for a while, and seemed to confirm that the armor remover sword was fine. He held it in his hand and turned around to walk to me. He had used the power of the yin and yang bottle to subdue Gu Yanran, so he had suffered a lot of injuries. Therefore, every step he took was extremely slow. The armor remover sword's broken blades scratched the ground, and the sound of friction was intermittent. Song Feng's eyes were fixed on me. There wasn't much joy from revenge in his eyes. Instead, there was a bit of anger. I had just let out a sigh of relief, but when I saw Song Feng's eyes, I was worried again. It was obvious that Gu Yanran's appearance had made Song Feng realize that I had lied to him. Although I did put in a lot of effort in subduing Gu Yanran, I was the one who lied to him first. Based on the deep hatred between Song Feng and Gu Yanran, it was normal for him to be angry at me now. In fact, when Song Feng had given me the armor remover sword and told me how to use it, I had felt guilty for lying to him. The reason why I had risked my life to help him this time was also because I felt sorry for him. Song Feng finally walked in front of me. He waved his right hand and pointed the armor remover sword at the tip of my nose. The sword energy on the broken blade was ready to attack. Seeing this, Officer Wang was ready to stop him. Although his cultivation wasn't high, this was Wanwu Grotto Heaven. With the power of the formation, it wouldn't be difficult for him to save me from Song Feng. However, I knew that I was in the wrong, so I stopped him. Song Feng sneered when he saw me stop Officer Wang. He turned his wrist and put away his dismantling armor sword. He said to me, "Boy, you should be glad that you met the current me. If it was in the past, you would have been killed by this old man's sword. Although you contributed to what happened today, it doesn't mean that you can forget what you did before." I clasped my hands at him. "Senior Song Feng, I was wrong to deceive you previously. However, I did not do it on purpose. It was because I was not familiar with Senior at that time, so I did not dare to tell you the truth. When Senior gave me the armor stripping sword, I was filled with regret. Ever since then, I've been looking for an opportunity to tell Senior the truth. However, I've been busy with the All-Heaven competition, so I haven't had the chance." Song Feng was an old monster that had lived for more than 200 years. His mind was as firm as a rock. If he really wanted to kill me, he definitely wouldn't give me a chance to explain. Since he had given me a chance to explain, it meant that he was just putting on a show. As expected, Song Feng shook his head and ignored my explanation. He continued, "If this matter is written off, it will make me feel uncomfortable. However, if I kill you, you did help me today. How about this? You agree to one condition of mine and we'll write it off. What do you think?" "Condition?" I nodded. "Senior, please enlighten me." Song Feng didn't hesitate and immediately said, "From now on, if there's any danger in Mysterious Treasure Grotto Heaven, you'll help if it's within your power. What do you think?" The most important thing for an old man was to pass on his legacy. Although Song Feng was an extraordinary person, he couldn't escape his nature. As for his condition, it was to give both of us a way out of this embarrassing situation. Moreover, the Mysterious Treasure Wonderland had always had a good relationship with the Wanwu Wonderland. Huang Fu Xiu and Officer Wang were also familiar with each other. They had always helped each other. I had no reason to reject Song Feng's condition. I nodded and cupped my hand. "Senior, don't worry. If there's any danger in Mysterious Treasure Grotto Heaven in the future, I'll definitely do my best." Song Feng still didn't have a good expression on his face. He forced himself to nod and coldly said, "Remember what you said." However, after saying that, he suddenly took out a small booklet from his chest and handed it to me. He still had that cold expression on his face as he continued, "Armor stripping said that you're a genius, but you're a sentimental person. You're not suitable for his emotionless sword path, but there's no problem in cultivating my emotionless sword path. This is my many years of cultivation experience. You should keep it. Whether or not you cultivate, there's no harm in looking through it. As for the armor-stripping sword, since I've already given it to you, it's not convenient for me to take it with me. You should keep it. After saying that, he returned the dismantling armor sword to me. His gaze looked at the broken body of the sword. After remaining silent for a while, he said, "Dismantling armor sword was severely injured at that time, which resulted in its current state. In today's battle, he was injured again. Your king's sword has the effect of nourishing him. You take good care of him for a few days. Xiao, we're leaving." After saying that, he waved his hand and walked out with Huangfu Xiao. Huangfu Xiao was confused by my conversation with Song Feng, but she couldn't say much in front of Song Feng. She only glanced at me before following Song Feng's footstep. Wang Can stood by my side. He didn't know what kind of grudge Song Feng and I had, but he didn't ask. After Song Feng and Huangfu Xiao left, he reported to me that he was going to call the servants to clean up the hall. At that moment the fatty walked in. He pointed in the direction that Song Feng and Huangfu Xiao had left in. He hastily said to me, "What happened just now?" I felt a strong fluctuation of Tao energy from outside. I thought that something had happened, so I set up the 9 Bends Yellow River formation to coordinate with you from the inside. In the end, there was no movement after the formation was set up. As he said that, the fatty walked to my side and looked me up and down. He asked with concern, "Third baby, are you okay?" When Wang Can and Song Feng came in, the fatty was already meditating by the lake. I had thought it was strange that the fatty didn't react to such a huge commotion. It turned out that he was preparing outside the palace. Thinking about this, my heart tightened. The fatty's 9 Bends Yellow River formation was very magical. If he had set up the formation at the door, Song Feng and Huangfu Xiao would be in big trouble when they went out. I hurried to ask the fatty about Song Feng and Huangfu Xiao's situation. The fatty waved his hand and casually sat on a chair. He said indifferently, "Don't worry, third baby. I have a good eye for things like this. When they went out, I saw that they were friendly. You and the Wang kid didn't chase after them, so I guess that there was nothing serious between you two. That's why I didn't touch the 9 Bends Yellow River formation and let them pass." It was rare that the fatty didn't cause any trouble this time. I heaved a sigh of relief. Since the fatty wanted to fix the formation, Wang Can's attitude toward him was much better. After the fatty came in, he didn't hurry to greet the servants. Instead, he sat next to me. I looked at the fatty and then at Wang Can. When I was about to tell him about the formation, the fatty seemed to do it on purpose. Before I could say anything, he turned his right hand and took out a small jade sword. He said to me, "Third baby, look at this." I had seen this kind of jade sword before. It was the sword spirit that Imo and Zhao Hao had cultivated since they were young. It was the source of their sword energy, and it was also the foundation of their sword technique. Although the fatty had tried to cultivate sword techniques, no matter how talented he was, he couldn't cultivate the sword spirit in such a short time. The fatty saw that Wang Can and I were surprised. He smiled complacently and took back the jade sword. "Didn't I tell you that my 9 Bends Yellow River formation can reduce the opponent's cultivation base? Today on the arena, I tried it. After defeating Li Yuan, I obtained this item from his body. Previously on the arena, it was not convenient for me to take it out. This should be the item that Li Yuan cultivated for his entire life, right?" After listening to the fatty, not only Wang Can, but I also took a deep breath. The defensive power of the fatty's formation was very strong, but even so, it couldn't escape the scope of an ordinary formation. However, the ability to reduce the opponent's cultivation base for his own use was really heaven-defying. Others had cultivated for dozens of years in the Nine Bends Yellow River Formation, but if they were careless, their cultivation base would be taken away by the fatty. This kind of ability was really scary. Then, I remembered that the fatty had said that if they didn't know about the change of a dynasty, they wouldn't be able to break through to the Heavenly Master realm. However, since the fatty had this formation that could absorb other people's cultivation base, he didn't need to cultivate at all. He could just find a Heavenly Master, throw him into the formation, and devour him. Wouldn't he become a Heavenly Master? I told him my idea, but the fatty shook his head. His complacent face was gone. He waved his hand and said in frustration, "It's not that easy. Although the Nine Bends Yellow River Formation can absorb other people's cultivation base for its own use, it can't be used by me. I can only use it once, and I can't absorb it for my own cultivation base." After listening to his explanation, I felt relieved. If the Nine Bends Yellow River Formation was really that powerful, the Zhenxiu sect wouldn't have to live in seclusion in that small hill. The whole metaphysics world would have been theirs. Although it wasn't as terrible as I had imagined, the Nine Bends Yellow River Formation was still very powerful. After the fatty absorbed Li Yuan's cultivation base, he wouldn't have to be beaten passively in the next battle. At least, he would have the power to fight back. Together with his talismans and the defensive power of the formation, he would be invincible in the glorious memory realm. After talking about this, I changed the topic to repairing the Wang family's formation. This time, the fatty couldn't refuse, so he had to promise in front of Wang Can. Chapter 628. After Officer Wang left, the fat man smiled happily. I didn't need to ask to know that he was happy because Officer Wang's attitude toward him had changed. After the servants of the Wang family came to clean up the Taoist palace, I asked the fat man to take a rest while I continued to work. Today, after the fierce battle in the arena and the battle with Gu Yanran, my Taoist qi and witch qi were all used up. To prepare for tomorrow's competition, I had to restore my true essence. The Wanwu Grotto Heaven was worthy of being the best of the blessed enclave. My cultivation speed, while sitting by the lake, wasn't any slower than absorbing the true dragon qi with the jade bracelet. In just an hour, my Taoist qi and true essence were fully restored. Then, I returned to the Taoist palace to restore my witchcraft qi and true essence. By the time my witchcraft qi and true essence were fully restored, the sky was already bright. While cultivating, I had the effect of sleeping, so I didn't need to sleep anymore. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, I recalled what had happened yesterday. I took out Song Feng's cultivation notes and studied them carefully. Song Feng's emotionless sword path couldn't be bad since he was one of the twin swordsmen of stripping armor. Song Feng's emotionless sword path couldn't be bad. It was true. I took the booklet and flipped through 3 or 4 pages. I was so engrossed in it that I couldn't help but flip through it. By the time the sky was bright, I had only read half of it. Even so, I had benefited a lot from it. Since I had already cultivated the sword nurturing technique that Taoist Huang Zhu had given me, I didn't know how to cultivate Song Feng's emotionless sword path. However, the sword path itself was interlinked. Although my foundation was weak, after reading Song Feng's notes, my understanding of the sword path had deepened. I also had a deeper understanding of the sword nurturing technique. As the All-Heaven Grand Competition was approaching, I went to pick the fat man up from the bed. I guessed he was too tired yesterday. When I went to wake him up, he was snoring loudly in the room. When I took him out of the bed, he looked at me with a blank face. He hadn't woken up yet. After the fat man washed up, we had breakfast. Then, we went to the venue of the All-Heaven Grand Competition. When we arrived at the venue, Officer Wang didn't wait for us at the entrance. Instead, he sent Ah Fu to meet us. When Ah Fu saw me and the fatty, he took the initiative to welcome us and said respectfully, "Saint, young Master Lin, our young master is very busy, so he asked this old servant to wait here." He also asked this old servant to inform the two of you that our opponent today is Lu Liang Mountain Paradise. Blessed land of Lu Liang Mountain? The figure of Elder Lin Shui of the corpse sect appeared in my mind. Just the power of Lu Liang Mountain Paradise was definitely not enough to make it to this round. Most of this was due to the remnants of the corpse sect at Chang Mountain Paradise. Of course, even if they gathered the power of Lu Liang Mountain Paradise and Chang Mountain Grotto Heaven, they would still be no match for us. After all, the resources of the 10 great grotto heavens were not something that these small grotto heavens and blessed lands could imagine. The only thing he needed to worry about now was that Zhao Hao might continue with yesterday's plan and plant people in Lu Liang Mountain Paradise. I asked Ah Fu, but Ah Fu smiled and shook his head. He said to me and the fatty, "Saint, you're overthinking it. In the blessed grotto heavens, anyone can cooperate with Xuanda Grotto Heaven. For the sake of benefits, our Wangu Grotto Heaven is the same. However, only Lu Liang Mountain Blessed Grotto Heaven will not cooperate with Zhao Hao." I was curious and asked him, "What's the reason?" Ah Fu said to me with a smile, "That day when Zhao Hao ambushed the saint, he used 2 sword slaves. Saint, do you still remember them? Those 2 sword slaves were Ah Mo's parents, so I naturally had a deep impression of them." I nodded. Ah Fu continued, "Although sword slaves are related to the sword Dao, fundamentally, they are inseparable from the corpse controlling techniques of Lu Liang Mountain Paradise and Chang Mountain Paradise. It was said that more than 100 years ago, the Xuanda Grotto Heaven had forcefully snatched the corpse controlling art from the blessed lands of Lu Liang Mountain and Chang Mountain Grotto Heaven. They had even captured many people from the 2 sects and used them to refine living people into sword slaves. Only after killing countless disciples from the 2 grotto heavens and blessed lands did they manage to research the method to refine sword slaves. Therefore, the 2 blessed lands and Xuanda Wonderland have a deep grudge against each other. It is impossible for the 2 sides to have any relations. This is something that everyone in the blessed enclave knows about. When I first saw Ah Mo's parents, who were the 2 sword slaves, I felt that the sword slaves were extremely similar to the corpse puppets of the corpse sect, but I didn't think too much about it. I didn't expect that the sword slaves were really born from the corpse puppet refining technique. However, when I thought about the corpse sect, I couldn't help but sigh. At that time, I felt that the corpse sect was a colossus that was even more powerful than the Metaphysics Association. However, after hearing Ah Fu's words, the corpse sect was unexpectedly bullied by the Xuanda Wonderland. From this, it could be seen that there was a big gap between the mortal world and the blessed lands. These sighs were just off topic. As for the next battle, with this old matter, Xuanda Wonderland wouldn't intervene. Therefore, today's battle would be much easier. As we chatted and laughed along the way, our group entered the venue. Since we had already entered the 4th round, there were only 16 blessed lands that were qualified to participate, so there weren't any other complicated matters. The few that were qualified to participate were already waiting in the arena. When Ah Fu, the fatty, and I arrived at the side of the arena, the 3 people from Lu Liang Mountain Paradise, including Lin Shui, were already standing in the arena. The 3 of them all had Yin energy lingering around them. Behind them were their own corpse puppet. 2 of them had black light flickering around them. Only Lin Shui's corpse puppet, Purple Chun, had purple energy all over its body, making it look quite mystical. Seeing the 3 of us come, Lin Shui stared at me for a long time. Then, she looked away. The Heavenly Master with the Yang Spirit Cultivation base stepped forward and cupped his hands to greet us. Yen Hongfei of Mount Lu Liang's blessed land wishes to learn from Wangu Wonderland. This person was quite old. I didn't know if he was from Lu Liang Mountain Paradise or Changshan Wonderland. I took a step forward and replied with the same courtesy, "Wanwu Wonderland's Zhou Yi seeks guidance from Senior." That Yen Hongfei seemed to be quite spirited. It seemed that the successive victories had made him dizzy. After receiving my reply, he didn't reply, but just nodded as if he agreed. Seeing this, I didn't say anything and just retreated angrily. I pulled the fatty and Ah Fu aside and warned them, they cultivate the corpse Tao, so their cultivation bases are in the corpse puppets. Don't be fooled by their low cultivation bases, but their methods are ruthless. Especially fatty, you have to be careful. If you encounter a corpse puppet, don't try to show off. Try to keep your distance from them. Don't let the corpse puppets get close to you. They carry a large amount of corpse poison, and after being refined by true essence and Tao energy, they are extremely powerful. Hearing my words, the fatty and Ah Fu nodded as if they had memorized my word. Especially the fatty. Although he was also a cultivator, this was his first time facing a corpse puppet. His expression was very unsightly. Seeing this, I patted his shoulder and comforted him. Don't be afraid, fatty. Although their corpse puppets are powerful, they are still inanimate objects. They don't have any intelligence. Moreover, the corpse puppets are of the yin attribute, so they are afraid of yang energy. When the time comes, we just need to use a few more raging flame talismans to take them down. Hearing that, the fatty clenched his fists and looked at me. He nodded and agreed. After saying that, the battle began. The fatty and Ah Fu walked to their respective arenas. I followed behind Lin Shui and walked to the Heavenly Seal Master's battle area. Lu Liang Mountain Blessed Land's cultivation was a realm lower than their corpse puppets. So, although Lin Shui could walk to the Heavenly Seal Master's arena, she relied on Purple Chen Corpse's power. Seeing that I was standing on the arena, Lin Shui looked at me and asked with a frown, "There's a familiar smell on your body. Have we met before?" I frowned. Lin Shui recognized me? When I entered the corpse insect, I used the e-ink pearl to disguise myself. Moreover, Lin Shui and I had only met a few times. We didn't have much contact and didn't have much of a relationship. Moreover, Lu Liang Mountain Blessed Land's strength was weak. It was much weaker than Wangu Paradise. So, when I met her again, I didn't think that I would have any interactions with her. Who knew that we would meet again on the arena? Moreover, she said such words the moment we met. I smiled and shook my head. I also feel that you look familiar. It's like I've seen you somewhere before. Please don't go overboard in this battle. Lin Shui shook her head and returned to her previous coldness. Without saying anything, she raised her hands and formed a hand seal to summon Purple Chen Corpse in front of her. Then, she said coldly, "Lu Liang Mountain's Lin Shui, please." I nodded and didn't stand on ceremony. I took out the armor-removing sword and held it in a backhand grip. I took 7 steps in the Heavenly Dipper 9 steps and used the Dongxian power to prepare to fight. Based on their previous contact, Lin Shui's Zi Qin corpse had a certain level of intelligence, and its movements were astonishingly fast. The reason why Lin Shui was able to overcome all the difficulties in the Celestial Master Arena was closely related to this corpse. As I judged in my heart, I silently inserted my Dao Qi into the sword. On Lin Shui's side, her hands continuously changed and the hand seals she formed became more and more complicated. Finally, she put her hands together and pointed her index fingers at Zi Chen's corpse. No matter if it was in the corpse sect or the arena of the All-Heaven competition, I had seen Lin Shui's battles many times. As soon as I saw her actions, I knew that she was going to command Zi Chen's corpse to attack me and engage me in close combat. Although Purple Chen Corpse was fierce at the corpse sect, his strength was only at the late stage of the Heavenly Master realm. However, Lin Shui's progress in the All-Heaven competition meant that Purple Chen Corpse's cultivation had greatly increased. So, I didn't dare to be careless. I took a deep breath and poured half of my Dao Qi into the armor-removing sword to prepare to fight. However, what I didn't expect was that after Lin Shui gave the order, Purple Chen Corpse stood in front of her and didn't have any intention of charging forward. At first, I thought I had misjudged Lin Shui's handprint. But soon, I saw confusion in Lin Shui's eyes. She formed a seal with her hands again. It was the same technique as before, After a set of complicated hand seals, she put her index fingers together and pointed at Zi Chen's body again. Chapter 629. Lin Shui probed several times, but Purple Chun Corpse didn't show any signs of moving forward. Her expression became ugly, and she seemed to mutter something. Then, she gritted her teeth and pointed at her forehead with her right index finger. She actually used the jade blood-turning pill technique. This jade blood-turning pill was a technique that used lifespan to raise cultivation. Although the All-Heaven competition was important, it wasn't enough to use up 10 years of lifespan. Moreover, Lin Shui had just joined Luliang Mountain Blessed Land, so no matter what, she didn't need to pay such a price. I frowned and couldn't understand Lin Shui's motives. As for Lin Shui, after using the jade blood-turning pill technique, her cultivation rose to Heaven Master realm. Her hands formed a seal, and she used a corpse control technique to point at Purple Chun Corp. The jade blood-turning pill technique was really profound. With its buff, Purple Chun Corpse finally moved a few steps forward and walked towards me. Its speed wasn't slow, but compared to the speed I had seen before, it was much slower. It was obvious that although Lin Shui barely managed to control Purple Chun Corpse, the fear in his eyes wasn't completely suppressed. Although I didn't know where the fear came from, but now wasn't the time to think about such things. Seeing Purple Chun Corpse charge at me, I raised my hands and faced it with the armor-removing sword. Purple Chun Corpse's physical body was really strong, and he was good at close combat. I was prepared for that. Before today, I didn't dare to get close to him, but after looking at the notes that Song Feng gave me, my sword cultivation improved. In the sword Dao, although there were ways to control a sword to kill, most of them were close combat. My understanding of the sword became deeper and deeper, so I used Purple Chun Corpse as a whetstone. Thus, I didn't dodge, and quickly clashed with Purple Chun Corpse. With the Heavenly Spirit 9 steps, Purple Chun Corpse had nowhere to hide. I could clearly see every movement he made, so I easily used the armor-removing sword to deal with him. As I clashed with Purple Chun Corpse more and more, I could clearly feel that he was getting weaker and weaker. After each attack, there would be a pause of 3 to 4 breaths. I stabbed once more. At this moment, Purple Chun Corpse was still pausing. Lin Shui sensed the strength of my strike and frowned. It was obvious that she was panicking. She formed seals with her hands and wanted to use Purple Chun Corpse to counterattack, but even after she formed a set of complicated seals, Purple Chun Corpse didn't react at all. It stood stunned on the spot and took the sword head-on. The corpse puppet was connected to the master's mind. Although Purple Chun Corpse blocked most of the attack, but a small portion of it landed on Lin Shui's being. Lin Shui's cultivation was only at the glorious knowledge realm, so after enduring a small portion of its might, her body trembled while her face flushed red, and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood before instantly becoming dispirited. Of Lin Shui's Chin Corpse to Shui, but seeing her like that of Shui, I couldn't of Chin die. Thus, after forcing back Zi Chen's corpse, I didn't choose to continue attacking. Instead, I stopped and put the armor-stripping sword on my back, waiting for Lin Shui to admit defeat. After forcefully pushing back Purple Chun Corpse, I didn't choose to continue attacking. Instead, I gathered my strength and formed a seal with both hands, waiting for Lin Shui to admit defeat. However, after Lin Shui got the chance to breathe, she didn't admit defeat. Instead, she forced herself to focus and formed a seal with both hands. She actually wanted to use the emerald blood-turning pill technique again. I was greatly alarmed and hastily tried to stop her. Miss Lin, the disparity between us is too great. I'm afraid that even the emerald blood transmutation technique won't be able to make up for it. Why is Miss Lin doing such a futile effort? The emerald blood-turning pill technique didn't reduce the user's lifespan, but it forcefully delayed the user's breakthrough to the next realm by 10 years. Lin Shui had already used it once, which meant that if she wanted to break through to the Heaven's Teacher realm, she would have to spend 10 years. If she used it again, it would be delayed by more than 20 years. She was still young, so there was no need for her to pay such a huge price for a battle where she couldn't see a victory. I didn't have a good impression of Corpse Sect, but I didn't have any ill intentions towards Lin Shui's master. Naturally, I didn't want her to end up like that, so I stopped her. Hearing that, Lin Shui was stunned for a moment, and her hand seals slowed down. Seeing that there was a chance, I didn't hide it anymore and directed the boundless Zhen Yuan in my body towards the armor-removing sword. Only when it was almost saturated did I stop. Holding the sword with both hands, I swept it towards Lin Shui's back. In an instant, a majestic sword aura flashed out. This was the technique that I had learned from Song Feng's booklet. Even though it was my first time using it, I was very confident in this technique. That sword energy really didn't disappoint me. The moment it appeared, the temperature of the entire arena seemed to drop by a few degrees as the sword energy flashed. Under this kind of power, Zichen's body started to tremble again, and his expression of fear became even more intense. Finally, the sword aura streaked across the sky and flew over Lin Shui's head. It landed on the barrier of the stage and created a large ripple. After the sword chi's power had completely dissipated, I turned around and spoke to Lin Shui again. Miss Lin's corpse puppet is indeed mysterious, but after the previous exchange, I believe that even if it was at its peak, it still wouldn't be a match for me. Miss Lin, are you sure you still want to use a technique that consumes your lifespan? Lin Shui's complexion wasn't good to begin with, and after seeing my technique, her complexion became even paler. After hearing my words, her face was as white as paper. She lowered her head and made a decision before finally spitting out a few words. I admit defeat. After saying that, she crawled up from the ground before I could react and called for Zichen to walk down the stage. Zichen was also very strange. When he was fighting against me, he was so frightened that he didn't dare to make any movements. However, when he walked down the stage, he was very fast. He was much faster than when I saw him at Corpse Sect. He didn't even care about Lin Shui and rushed down the stage before turning around and looking at me with a fearful expression. As I watched his movements, I became even more confused. Why was Zichen so afraid of me? What was he afraid of? Since the outcome of the battle had been decided, I didn't stay long after Lin Shui left the stage, so I also walked down the stage. At that moment, the other two battles were also coming to an end. With my instructions before I went up the stage, both Ah Fu and the fatty chose to fight from a distance. Ah Fu was a Yang God celestial master, and his techniques were all based on his Yang spirit. Although Yan Hongfei's corpse puppet was also a Yang God celestial master, it wasn't as agile as Ah Fu's. No matter which angle he controlled the corpse puppet to attack from, Ah Fu was able to deal with it. In the end, Ah Fu turned his Yang spirit into a sword light and cut off one of the corpse puppet's arms, ending the battle. As for the fatty, he continued to fight in the same wretched manner as before. He hid in the formation and occasionally used his talismans to defend himself. He didn't even use the technique that he had obtained from Li Yuan. After seeing that Ah Fu and I had finished our battles, he took out a silver talisman and released a wisp of true fire. His opponent, who was already exhausted, didn't have the slightest ability to resist and was directly injured. Thus, the fatty won smoothly. He had won all 3 battles, so the final result was obvious. After returning to the seats of the Wangu cave, I chatted with Officer Wang, who was grinning happily. Then, I looked at the arena again. Only then did I realize that in the 4th round of the competition, the battle between our Wangu Grotto and Lu Liang Mountain Paradise was actually the first to end. The other grottos were still fighting, and most of them hadn't even finished their battles yet. Soon, the Xuanda Cave, which was represented by Zhao Hao, also finished his battle. From the happy look on his face, I could tell that he would definitely enter the top 8. As he walked out of the arena, Zhao Hao glanced around the viewing platform and stared at Officer Wang and me for a while. Then, he walked back to his resting place. As the competition progressed, the gap between everyone's strength was getting smaller and smaller, so the battles were getting more and more intense. After half an hour, the third family won smoothly. It was the West City Mountain Paradise, where Han Wennan was located. The West City Mountain Paradise was really strong. Han Wennan didn't even need to show up, but they still got a spot in the next round. I scanned the arena, and eventually, my eyes stopped at the Spiritual Mountain Paradise, where Lu Zhenyang was located. In this competition, Lu Zhenyang's opponent wasn't weak. He was from the Jutsu Cave, the Golden Altar Huayang Cave. Mao Mountain's original name was Jutsu Mountain. According to the legend, more than 2,000 years ago, during the Western Han Dynasty, the three brothers, Mao Ying, Mao Gu, and Mao Zhong, came to Jiangnan from Guangzhou and lived in seclusion on Jutsu Mountain. They concentrated on practicing Taoism, gathering medicinal herbs, refining pills, and saving people's lives. They became the ancestors of the Mao Mountain Taoist faction. Later generations remembered the merits of the Mao family, so they changed the name of Jutsu Mountain to Mao Mountain. After the Mao family, Yang Shi and the others of the Eastern Jin dynasty founded the Shangqing Taoist faction. Then, Tao Hongjing, a hermit of the Qi and Liang dynasties, founded the Mao Mountain Taoist faction. It wasn't until the Tang and Song dynasties that Mao Mountain flourished. Li Shimin didn't forget Wang Yuanji, the Taoist priest of Mao Mountain. After that, Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty didn't mistreat Mao Mountain. Later on, the Taoist priest of Mao Mountain, Lu Hunkong, used a secret prescription to relieve the pain of Song Zhezong's mother. He was bestowed the 8 treasures of the mountain. There were 4 treasures on the mountain: a jade seal, a jade talisman, a jade tablet, and an ink stone. He even had 200 imperial guards protecting the monastery. From this, one could see the prestige of Mao Mountain. Against such a colossus, apart from Lu Zhenyang, who had used some unknown method to obtain victory, the other two were having a hard time. Lu Zhenyang's father had even taken out Lu Zhenyang's Qiyu axe. However, he was still unable to deal with the opponent's attacks, causing me to feel extremely nervous. If it was before, I would have thought that it would be better for Lu Zhenyang to be defeated by his opponent. However, ever since I had received Lu Zhenyang's promise, I had been watching his every match anxiously. I was afraid that one of them would lose in one move and be eliminated. As the competition progressed, the possibility of us meeting Lu Zhenyang became higher. If he took the initiative to admit defeat, it wouldn't matter if it was me or Fatty Fu, we would be able to enter the next round without having to fight one more time. Time ticked by, and the battle between the Holy Mountain Blessed Land and the Golden Altar of Splendor Sun's Grotto Heaven was finally over. Unexpectedly, the winner wasn't the Golden Altar of Splendor Sun's Grotto Heaven, but the Holy Mountain Blessed Land behind the Lu family. Actually, not long after Lu Zhenyang's battle ended, his uncle Lu Qingping was defeated and tied with the Golden Altar of Splendor Heaven. In the end, all the pressure fell on Lu Zhenyang's father, Lu Qingyi. I didn't know what method he used, but he used his Qiyu axe to defeat his opponent. The Spiritual Mountain Paradise won a precious point and sent his family to the 5th round. Chapter 630. When we returned to the Dao Palace, Officer Wang seemed to have calculated the time. Right after the fatty and I had finished dinner, he appeared at the gate of the Dao Palace. Perhaps it was because we had won a lot in the arena and were getting closer to the champion position, or perhaps it was because he had seen the fatty's 9 Bends Yellow River formation and thought that the Wanwu Fairyland's protective formation could be repaired, but Officer Wang was in a good mood. He walked briskly, and the worry on his face was gone. Because of our agreement yesterday, the fatty and I didn't think it was strange. However, Officer Wang thanked me and the fatty. Then, he took out the ancient book that recorded the mountain-protecting formation. It was a yellowed ancient book. Just as Officer Wang had said, the pages were broken, and many parts of the book couldn't be seen clearly. The fatty didn't mind it. He took the book from Officer Wang and read it carefully. However, it didn't take long for his expression to turn ugly. Did he encounter a problem? Seeing him like that, my heart was in my throat. I couldn't help but lean over to take a look. In layman's terms, a formation was the arrangement of a formation in a battle. If a formation was arranged properly, it could fully exert its fighting power. Through a reasonable arrangement of soldiers, it could exert the best effect and defeat the enemy. The people of metaphysics also discovered this. They used spiritual items, talismans or Taoist qi to replace the soldiers and set up the formation. They found that the effect was amazing, so some people went deeper and deeper into this path, and passed down the path of formation. I wasn't an expert in formations, but after hanging out with the fatty for a long time, I knew some of the basics. However, the things recorded in the book were obscure and hard to understand, as if they were from the heavens. There were also some things that couldn't be recorded in words, so the ancient book listed them in the form of diagrams. Although I wanted to help, I wasn't professional enough, so I wasn't able to do anything. I looked at the fatty, and his face kept changing. I couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? What's the problem?" The fatty was very excited. After hearing my question, he answered without raising his head, "The knowledge about formations in this book is very profound. There are some things that aren't even recorded in the scripture depository of Arjan Faction. I can't guarantee that I can find an effective method right away, but give me 3 days. I think I can do it." Fatty had always been a straightforward person. He would say whatever he wanted to say. If he spoke like that, then there must be a big problem. However, after receiving his assurance, I was no longer worried. Since he had said so, it meant that he was 60 to 70% sure that the formation could be repaired. Hearing that, Wang Can's expression also relaxed. He looked at the fat man, then at me. He lowered his voice and said, "In that case, I won't bother you anymore. Young Master Lin, don't worry. Your health is the most important. Sage, young Master Lin, I still have some other matters to attend to. I'll take my leave first." I waved my hand and escorted Officer Wang out of the Holy Ji Palace. I told him about the competition, and then returned to the Holy Ji Palace. Fatty, on the other hand, seemed to be in a trance. He held the ancient book in one hand and drew a few lines in the air with his other hand, as if he was practicing a formation. Don't be fooled by his simple movements, but the aura that leaked out was not to be underestimated. Seeing the fatty's temperament, I didn't say much. I just reminded him not to stay up too late. Then, I returned to my room to rest. I had a lot of things to do these days, and it was rare for me to have a good rest. After I returned to my room, I went to bed and slept. When I woke up, it was already the next morning. After washing up, I went to the fatty's room to wake him up, but he wasn't in his room. I felt strange, so I went to the living room and found him sleeping on the floor. It was obvious that this fellow had been studying the array the entire night and had fallen asleep in the hall because he had overdone it. Although cultivators had much more energy than ordinary people, formations were something that consumed one's mind. It was easy for them to be exhausted. Seeing how tired the fatty was, I wanted to let him sleep. However, since the All-Heaven Grand competition was about to start, I had no choice but to wake him up. After waking up, the fatty seemed to have recovered. After washing up, he followed me to the venue. Along the way, the fatty kept talking about the Wang family's protective formation. He couldn't stop praising it. He also said that after a night of study, he had learned a lot of knowledge from the ancient book, and his mastery of array formations had also improved a lot. After listening to him, my last bit of worry was gone. The fatty was completely immersed in studying formations. Even if Officer Wang asked him to stop repairing the formation, I was afraid he wouldn't agree. Soon, the fatty and I arrived at the venue. It was strange that Officer Wang and Fu were waiting for us at the entrance. When they saw me and the fatty, they hurried to welcome us, their faces filled with anxiety. I looked at them and asked, "What's wrong?" When Officer Wang heard my question, he swallowed his saliva and said slowly, "Sage, our opponent today is Lu Jinyang." Lu Jinyang? Yesterday, I thought that after the 4th round, it would be more likely for us to meet each other. I didn't expect that we would meet each other today. Because of our agreement, I hoped that Lu Jinyang would go a little later. Unfortunately, things didn't go our way, and we met each other in this round. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Officer Wang opened his mouth and said, "According to Lu Jinyang's previous performance, Fu won't be able to defeat him in the Yang God Celestial Masters arena. So, if we want to win this match, we have to rely on the Sage and young Master Lin." Then, he glanced at the fatty. After listening to Officer Wang, I got it. When Lu Jinyang came to see me, Officer Wang wasn't there. Of course, he didn't know that Lu Jinyang had promised to admit defeat. This morning, he and Fu were waiting at the entrance in a panic. I guess they were frightened by Lu Jinyang's strength and felt pressured. That was why they came to see me and the fatty to discuss countermeasures. After understanding this, I smiled and said to Officer Wang and Fu, "Don't worry. Today we don't need to fight to enter the next round." "Why?" Officer Wang frowned and looked puzzled. I smiled and kept him in suspense. I didn't say anything and just waved my hand as I walked into the hall. When we entered the venue, the Lu family was already waiting for us. As I had expected, Lu Jinyang wasn't there. Only Lu Qingyi and Lu Qingping were there. When Lu Qingping saw me in the crowd, he glanced at me and snorted coldly. Then, he looked away. When I walked closer, I saw that he was holding his arms. The wounds he had received in the arena yesterday hadn't healed yet. Lu Qingyi was not much better off. His face was frighteningly pale. It looked like even though he had won against the golden altar of Huayang's cave on the arena yesterday, he had paid a hefty price. Seeing me walk towards them, Lu Qingyi looked at me coldly and said, "Jinyang said that we will admit defeat today. I hope you will remember your promise." It was obvious that Lu Qingyi didn't approve of Lu Jinyang's decision. However, Lu Jinyang wasn't the young master who relied on the Lu family's power to act like a tyrant. He was the true leader who carried the Lu family forward. Since he had made his decision, even his father, Lu Qingyi, couldn't oppose him. No matter what, the Lu family had admitted defeat. I could relax for a day. So, I was in a good mood. I didn't care about the coldness in Lu Qingyi's eyes and just nodded. Of course, Lu Qingyi didn't say anything else. After admitting defeat, he brought Lu Qingping and left the arena. After entering this round, every step forward was a great fortune. No matter how great the difference in power was, they would choose to fight to the death. However, the spiritual mountain-blessed land actually admitted defeat before the battle. This caused a huge uproar in the arena. However, very quickly, after the other battles started, everyone's gazes were attracted to them. No one paid attention to us anymore. At this moment, the fatty, Ah Fu and I returned to the viewing platform. Like everyone else, we raised our heads to look at the other battles on the arena. It was now the 5th round of the Heavenly Grand Ritual. There were only 8 families that had the qualifications to participate. In other words, after this battle, there would be 2 more rounds. Our Wanwu Wonderland would be able to sit on the champion's position for another 10 years. In these 2 rounds, there was a high chance that we would meet the West City Wonderland. With Han Wenan's guarantee, even if we met the West City Wonderland, it would be a win without a fight. So, there was a high possibility that we would only need 1 more battle to be able to hold on to the champion's position. Just now, I glanced at the West City Wonderland's arena. I didn't know when, but their main team had changed. The leader was Han Wenan's personal maid, Lu Wu. However, Han Wenan still didn't have any intention of fighting. Apart from the West City Wonderland, the other Wonderlands were basically the same. At this stage of the competition, all the surviving Wonderlands had basically used up all their trump card. It was normal that there weren't any changes. This round of battles was still rather intense. However, there weren't many highlights. Lu Wu and the others were strong. They suppressed their opponents the moment they entered the arena and won a battle in a short period of time. The West City Wonderland's other two battles were also successful. Very quickly, they won both battles and became the second Wonderland to advance to the semi-finals. Next was the Schwanda Wonderland. Under Zhao Hao's lead, they fought fiercely. Especially his cloud-swallowing sword art, it attracted a lot of attention. Even I couldn't help but take a few more glances. I became even more cautious. Just like that, the Schwanda Wonderland won the third spot in the semi-finals. Following that, the battles continued until noon. The fourth spot was confirmed. It was the Weiyu Wonderland, also known as the Great Emptiness Wonderland. Thus, the fifth round came to an end. Chapter 631. When we returned to the palace that Officer Wang had prepared for us, the fatty ignored me and rushed back to his room to study the Wang family's formation. Seeing that he was so enthusiastic, I couldn't stay idle. After dinner, I returned to my room and continued to read Song Feng's emotive sword path. On the way back, I carefully pondered. According to the rules of the Heavenly Grand Ritual, I didn't have to wait until the finals. I would be fighting Zhao Hao in the next round, which was tomorrow. Although I've fought Zhao Hao in the past, Zhao Hao had relied on the strength of a sword slave to fight me, so he didn't reveal much of his own strength. Coupled with the fact that he and I practically walked onto the arena at the same time and left the arena at the same time, this is the first time I've seen him fight with his full strength. His cloud-swallowing sword art was very powerful. Even though I was on the viewing platform, I felt that this move couldn't be underestimated. According to my current strength, I only had a 50-50 chance of winning against him. If I wasn't careful, I might lose. According to Schwanda's Wonderland's strength, they didn't have any hope of winning against Ah Fu. Therefore, I felt an unprecedented sense of urgency. I had to make the best use of my time to study Song Feng's emotive sword path. After using Hidden Edge's emotionless sword Dao in the arena today, I have become somewhat familiar with it. Although its power couldn't be compared to the emotionless sword path, it had sufficient momentum. Most importantly, compared to the emotionless sword path, Song Feng's emotionless sword path conserved more true essence. This gave me more opportunities to counterattack in the arena. Furthermore, the power that the emotional sword Dao had displayed so far was only half of the effect that I had studied. When I had mastered the emotional sword Dao and met Zhao Hao in the arena, his chances of winning wouldn't be more than 30%. The night passed uneventfully. As the sun rose from the east, I came back to my senses from the emotionless sword path. I looked at the booklet that I had studied thoroughly and immediately felt much more relaxed. After cleaning up, I brought the fatty to the arena. On the way, I mentioned that my opponent today was Zhao Hao. When the fatty heard that, he became much more spirited. He patted his chest and assured me, "Don't worry, third child. Even that Li Yuan wasn't a match for me. This time, even if they send someone like Zhao Yuan or Lu Yuan from the Schwanda Grotto Heaven, I will still be able to kill them." I looked at the fatty. This fellow hadn't rested last night. He must have spent the whole night researching, just like me. However, I couldn't see much exhaustion on his face. On the contrary, he gave me a feeling that he was in high spirits. Come to think of it, after last night's training, his skills have improved a lot, and with Li Yuan's cultivation in his hands, I'm afraid his chances of winning are even greater than mine against Zhao Hao. When we arrived at the venue, Officer Wang and Fu were still waiting for us at the entrance. When they saw me and the fatty, they took the initiative to greet us. I glanced at them. They looked even more nervous than the day before. Officer Wang came over and said in a low voice, "Sage, Child Lin, Zhao Hao's main force has changed again. Perhaps they had expected that we would be enemies." Officer Wang brought 2 helpers from the Xuanda cave to replace the previous Yang God Celestial Master and Ji Yao Geomaster. I haven't found out the specific situation yet. We'd better be careful in the arena today. They've changed again? Zhao Hao had said at the banquet that he already had the power of the Yang God Celestial Master. However, he had been suppressing his power to break through in order to participate in the All-Heaven Grand competition. For Wanwu Cave, he was already a formidable opponent. Now that he had 2 more mysterious helpers, it was no wonder that Officer Wang and Fu were so nervous. I smiled and nodded in agreement, but I was still looking forward to fighting against him. Especially the fatty. He understood that Zhao Hao had shamelessly invited helpers to deal with him. Not only was he not afraid, but he also looked complacent. He was eager to have a try. We entered the venue and waited for a while at the edge of the arena. Zhao Hao's team was late. I glanced at Zhao Hao's team. The Yang God Celestial Master and Ji Yao Geomaster had changed. The previous Yang God Celestial Master was a white-haired old man with a fiery temper. He would create a gust of wind when he walked. But today, the Yang God Celestial Master on Zhao Hao's left side was a middle-aged man in his 30s. After noticing us, he had a smile on his face and didn't have any hostility. On his right side, the previous young Ji Yao Geomaster had been replaced by an old man. Just from his appearance, I couldn't see any difference. However, after his gaze locked onto the fatty in the crowd, it was filled with viciousness, like a poisonous snake that had found its prey. Zhao Hao came in front of us. It was rare that he didn't flaunt his prowess. Instead, he wore a disdainful smile as he said to me, "Zhou Yi, I advise you to quickly admit defeat. I know that you aren't weak, but do you know who the 2 people beside me are? This is the Jade Beauty Sword Monarch, Hu Yurong, and this is the #1 person in the Zhiyao realm, Li Yuan. Li Yuan, whose cultivation was destroyed by the fatty in the previous match, is the grandson of Senior Li Yuan." As he said that, Zhao Hao suddenly stopped. When he opened his mouth again, his voice became cold. "So, if you don't want to die, I advise you to quickly admit defeat. Jade Beauty Sword Monarch, Hu Yurong. The #1 person in the Zhiyao realm, Li Yuan? I really didn't have much of an impression of that Jade Beauty Sword Monarch. Perhaps Zhao Hao wanted to use this name to scare me and the fatty, but he miscalculated. The fatty and I weren't people from the blessed land. We had always been cultivating in the mortal world, so we had never heard of the name Jade Beauty Sword Monarch. However, that Li Yuan was worth paying more attention to. If what Zhao Hao said was right, it was no wonder that the old man's gaze was fixed on the fatty from start to finish, as if he couldn't wait to kill him. It turned out that he was here to take revenge for Li Yuan. Battles were originally based on one's own abilities. Injuries and deaths were expected. Since he had implicitly allowed Li Yuan to represent the Xuanda Wonderland to fight, the current situation should also be expected. Furthermore, the fatty didn't kill Li Yuan, so it was unreasonable for Li Yuan to be so fierce and come to seek revenge. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Zhao Hao thought that his words were effective. His aura increased, and he prepared to say a few more harsh words. However, I came back to my senses at this moment and interrupted him. On the stage, it's all based on one's own abilities. You have your methods, and I have my countermeasures. Let's not waste time talking. Let's fight on the stage. Although I didn't know what he was planning, I couldn't be bothered to pay attention to this kind of person, let alone say anything. Zhao Hao's aura stagnated, and he gloomily smiled at me. He didn't say anything else, and took the Jade Beauty Sword Monarch, Hu Yurong, and the old man called Li Yuan up the stage. I looked at their backs, and told the fatty to be careful when he fought with Li Yuan. After the fatty walked up the stage, I turned to look at Ah Fu, preparing to tell him to be careful as well. However, Ah Fu's expression was frighteningly ugly. Seeing that I turned to look at him, he opened his mouth and said in a low voice, "Saint, you and young Master Lin grew up in the mortal world, so you don't know much about the matters of the blessed and heavenly lands. Thus, you aren't very clear about Hu Yurong and Li Yuan's abilities. Take that Li Yuan for example. When he just entered the glorious consciousness realm, he became the public enemy of the 72 blessed lands. In order to capture him, the 72 blessed lands united and launched no less than 100 attacks. Their manpower ranged from the glorious Earth Master to the Heavenly Seal Master. There were many times when they almost killed him, but he killed them all. Because of this, the Schwanda Wonderland dared to go against the heavens and go against the opinions of the masses to take him under their wing. Young Master Lin, I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to meet him." Hearing that, I furrowed my brows and raised my head to look at the sinister old man on the stage. This person was able to escape the joint attacks of the 72 blessed lands, so he was definitely a ruthless character. Moreover, he had killed them several times. This Li Yuan was indeed worthy of the title of the first person in the glorious consciousness realm. However, I still had confidence in the fatty. He had the 9 bends Yellow River formation and many talismans. Even if he didn't have 100% chance of winning against Li Yuan, it wasn't as impossible as Ah Fu had said. From what I could see, the fatty's chances of winning were higher. I comforted Ah Fu and told him not to worry. There was definitely no problem with the fatty. Only then did he calm down. However, when I immediately asked about Sword Sovereign Yurong, Hu Yurong's expression tensed up again. According to Ah Fu, Hu Yurong was the same as Li Yuan. Originally, she wasn't from the Schwanda Wonderland. Instead, she was from one of the 72 blessed lands. 10 years ago, this person had emerged as a new force, and no one in the 72 blessed lands was a match for him. Moreover, he was obsessed with cultivation. After he couldn't find an opponent in the 72 blessed lands, he started to look for the 36 lesser wonderlands. He started from the Jinhua Wonderland, and he had never been defeated. It wasn't until he reached the gate of the Schwanda Wonderland that he finally hit a wall. In that battle, both sides fought for hundreds of rounds without a clear winner. In the end, he was defeated by Zhao Hao's father by one move. Then, according to the agreement, he entered the Schwanda Wonderland and became their foreign official. After that, in less than 3 years, he learned the sword cultivation techniques of the Schwanda Wonderland and challenged Zhao Hao's father again. This time, the two of them were equally matched. After that, there were no more news about this person. However, it was said that his strength had surpassed the Yang spirit realm. It was no wonder that Ah Fu's expression became fearful when he saw him. It turned out that there was such a story behind it. If Li Yuan's counterattack under the siege of the 72 blessed lands was a miracle, then Hu Yurong's story was simply crazy. He had challenged the blessed lands all by himself. How strong was he? If Ah Fu met him now, what were his chances of winning? Ah Fu seemed to see through my worries. He bowed and promised me, "Holy Sage, I might not be Hu Yurong's opponent, but I will try my best. As for the other 2 matches, I will have to rely on you and young Master Lin." I nodded, signaling him not to worry. Then, I led him to the arena. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.